Yeehaw, we're live. Hi, guys.
I'm fine. I'm totally fine. I'm not concerned about
Marked decrease in size
and
from
stuff. But I just, as long as I've got a motorhome and then a bedroom to come back to.
You are now tuned into. Hey, you want to shut the door, please?
What on TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not good at leaving you alone.
In every revolution, there's one man with a vision.
Captain Kirk, I shall consider it.
Did that just say copyright?
You are now tuned into the truth frequency.
We are TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio. Sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not good at leaving you alone.
In every revolution, there's one man with a vision.
Captain Kirk, I shall consider it.
Hang on. Sorry, I'm going to freeze it. Hang on, I've got to read that, see if it's copyrighted or if that's saying fair use. Oh, good. It's yeah, good. It's not copyrighted. That was the FBI saying fair use thing, so that's cool.
I've been a participant in some of the most insidious lies and witnessed to deeds that no crazed man can imagine. I spent years watching you from my lofty position to know that you were the one I could trust. And why did you lie to me? There still exists some secrets which should remain secret. Truths that people are just not ready to know. Who are you to decide that? The world's reaction to such knowledge would be far too dangerous.
Yeah, Diane, we're getting more join the chat now as well, so slowly it's growing.
You mean in the sense of outrage? Like the reaction to the Kennedy assassination, or MIAs, or radiation experiments on terminal patients, Watergate, Iran-Contra, Roswell, Tuskegee experiments. Where will it end?
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
always remember, dissension's the greatest form of patriotism.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies.
We have before us the opportunity to forge a new world order.
Yes, we can. And you take.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories. Our lives most convincingly hidden between two truths.
I guess it won't end.
No! I don't have time for this. This is about saving the future of humanity.
We know things are bad, worse than bad. We know the air is unfit to breathe and our food is unfit to eat. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the inflation and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther.
I want you to get out right now. Go to your windows, open them, and stick your head out and yell, I'm a human being. My life has value. And I won't tolerate this anymore.
You're listening to the Revolutionary Radio Project with your host, Rob Skiba.
Hello and welcome to the Revolutionary Radio Project. I am your host, Rob Skiba, and tonight I'm bringing back Gary Wayne. He was on our show last week talking about his book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And so since we've already done the introductions and all that good stuff, let's go ahead and just jump right in. Gary, are you there, sir?
I am.
Sure.
I had my mic on mute. So very happy to be back here tonight and looking forward to another very, very interesting show for your listeners. So we're all ready to go.
Yeah, well, I had a lot of good feedback from the last show, and I know we barely just scratched the surface. Hey, were you did you do a show of some sort with John Pounders from Now You See TV?
I've done several with John.
Oh, very cool.
Very cool. Yeah, and I've done I think 3 video ones with make it 4 now with John since about October, and I've also done several audio ones. And if anybody's interested in any of those, they're on my website, www.genesis6conspiracy.com, and also on John's website and podcast locations. So yeah, what he's been doing is sort of focusing in lately on specific topics. So I did one last week on the Templars, and one just before that on the Nazis and the relationship to this whole conspiracy and giants and the mythos that went with the Nazis, and one on Azazel. So it was a pretty interesting show.
Yeah.
Wow, that sounds interesting. And not the Nazis and the giants.
Just was recently on his show and working with him to edit the video of the show that we did. And he usually puts like other shows that he's done sort of in the right-hand column, like thumbnails. I guess people can click on them. And the whole time I was looking at the video that we did together, I was seeing you up in the top right.
Sorry.
No, it's good, man. It's cool. Yeah, it's really good. So I'm trying to remember. I think the last thing we talked about was the Ishtar ISIS deal, chapter 15 in your book, and I think maybe we might have briefly touched on Atlantis, but that's kind of a bigger topic. And if we did get very far on it, we only had a few minutes. So why don't we start there? Maybe as a recap, anything you might have remembered from last show, and anything else you'd like to share about Atlantis from your research.
Yeah, when we talk about Atlantis, what I like about the Atlantis mythology is that it so parallels the Genesis story that, except that you have to remember that it's from a polytheist perspective. So we have, for example, Poseidon, who is the god, and of course in the monotheist perspective, he would be a fallen angel. And he takes human wives and he creates 10 kings that rule over the Atlantean Empire. And these 10 kings are Titans. And so we have a story ruling over one of the major empires of the polytheist belief on the antediluvian world. And so again, and if people aren't familiar with it, with the polytheist belief system, is that they believe there were more than just the Sumerian civilization. There was at least 3 or 4, and if you expand, as I do in this section of the book, which is section 3 that we're talking about, I'll get into the 7 cult centers, the 7 sages, and the 7 gods that set up these cult centers and empires around the world. So when we look at Atlantis, it parallels pretty much what Genesis is talking about, where you have this creation of these Nephilim. They usurp the kingships, they start wars, they're actually trying to take the whole world over, and as they progress, they become more and more and more evil. And they actually rebel against the gods. And then the gods, and they actually temporarily win, but then Zeus steps in, and I'm sure with Poseidon as well, even though these were kings of Poseidon, but the powerful gods, they line up some other titans, and there's this war, and the rebellious titans are the way to a prison called Tartarus, which again, in the polytheist belief system, not the monotheist belief system, is one of the ways that, because there are several in the polytheist belief system, how the giants survived the flood, that these giants were protected in Tartarus, wherever that is, in the earth, outside of the earth, wherever. There's different variations on how that plays out. But they escape out of Tartarus after the flood. So this whole sort of thing about what happens with the Nephilim in Genesis, it has more context. Again, understanding that this is a polytheist belief system in Atlantis, but it parallels the Genesis story. And what's really interesting is, as I get further into the book, whether or not you're talking about the Templars, or you're talking about Francis Bacon, or you're talking about Rosicrucians, or you're talking about Freemasons or the Royal College, they are absolutely infatuated with this belief to create the new Atlantis. And they call it, in today's religion, the New Age, the New Age of Aquarius. But they want to reestablish the Golden Age, which in their belief system is the antediluvian period. And they want to establish it under the model of Atlantis. So this new Atlantis is to have the same amount of empires in it in the end time as they did in the antediluvian time, and that is 10 empires. And of course, anybody who knows prophecy, all of a sudden you're thinking about Daniel, and you're thinking about Revelation. And part of this establishing these 10 empires, and this isn't probably going to talk a whole bunch about it in this show, is the Club of Rome was, as a secret society, was established to make this happen. And so they envision the world's going to be split into 10 empires. They would call them spheres of influence, economic zones, trading blocks, however you want to phrase it, but they already have the world split into 10, but that's later on in the book.
So a couple questions based on what you just talked about. Now, Josephus likens the first generation Nephilim to the Titans of Greek mythology. And, of course, in the Greek myths, you have the Olympians,
I Josephus spoke about them.
Poseidon and Zeus, and there would also be Hades, overthrowing the Titans. Now, I've seen compelling evidence on both sides of the flood for the Olympians. Do you place them solidly in the pre-flood world, or do you see the Olympians either making a return or originating in the post-flood world?
I clearly, in my opinion, put them in the antediluvian world, and perhaps some of the unimpassioned ones are still out there, because I look at that at the highest level as fallen angels, as opposed to sort of the lower level of gods in the pantheon. So I would look at the ones that didn't participate in creating giants or other things that might have corrupted the antediluvian world, and who weren't imprisoned into the abyss. I would say that they probably were around after the flood as well, and were part of the inspiration to the startup of all the different religions and secret societies and everything that happened after the flood.
Have you read any of the works of Dr. Ken Johnson?
No.
He had a book called Ancient Post-Flood History, and he traces the origin of the Olympians in the post-flood world. But like you, I see evidence of it in the pre-flood world. I took a different view on characters like Zeus. A lot of people want to say Zeus is like a fallen angel because he's always coming down from the sky and mating with women and whatnot. But the reason why I took a different view on it was all the stories of Zeus talk about him being born and growing up and dying. So I couldn't reconcile that with angels. I see no precedence for angels being born. However, the altar of Zeus in Pergamum was referred to in the book of Revelation as a seat of Satan. So it just seemed like, okay, well, whatever was going on with Zeus, he certainly had some kind of affiliation with Satan for the seat of Satan to be a reference to the altar of Zeus that was in Pergamum.
Yeah, and I think you have to understand that there are different levels of the hierarchy in the pantheon. And so, for example, and I'm not sure whether we covered this in the last show or not, we might have, but similar to the Anunnaki and the Sumerian mythology and religions. So you have two types of titans. You have a titan that is an earthborn god or demigod, and Nephilim in this case, and then you have a higher form of titan, which is another god, but may not be as high up on the pantheon. And these middle gods may be when we look at what polytheism talks about in their doctrine is that they have the ability to reproduce gods by having gods mating with gods, because they could choose their gender as they came into this realm, to produce a lower level of god. So a Nephilim-like, but only, let's say, a heavenly Nephilim or a heavenly Titan. And so when we look at the Sumerian mythology, they also have the Anunnaki from heaven and the Anunnaki of the earth. And this crops up a fair bit around the world. So it's a consistent doctrine that when they're talking about some of these gods, like, let's say, like Prometheus. And when we look at the Greek flood story, and we have Deucalion and Noria or Nama or Horia or several other names, and depending on which Gnostic gospel that you're looking at or which of the mythologies you're looking at in Greek, as the Noah for the Greek mythology. Well, we're not talking about a human there. We're talking about a Nephilim in that mythology surviving, because Deucalion is the son of Prometheus. And whether Prometheus is another Nephilim or a higher form of Nephilim that is somewhere in between, or a fallen angel, doesn't matter, because Deucalion becomes a Nephilim in that mythos surviving the flood.
Surviving the flood in what way?
On an ark.
Oh, interesting.
Just as Gilgamesh is, and we'll probably cover that a little bit further off today if we stay on this section, that is not a Noah story.
What's not a Noah story?
The Epic of Gilgamesh.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so, go with it.
Let's go with it right now. Okay, fine. Right. So when we look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, and this is all happening in the preamble that I'm talking about. So we have Gilgamesh, who's introduced as this Nephilim king who survived the flood. And he's also, Gilgamesh, his name goes back to the books of Enoch and is recorded. And that Enoch was one of the giants that Enoch told that the flood was coming and there's nothing that they can do. So I'm thinking, connecting dots here, that it's probably the same Gilgamesh. So this Gilgamesh is a demigod, as it writes out in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and he's produced in the same way all of the giants are produced. And he's a typical model, role model evil Nephilim king. He ruled as a king before the flood. He rules as a king after the flood. Now, he is telling the story of the flood story of Ziazudra or Upnapishtim to a fellow named Enkidu. And Enkidu is another enunciation of it, but same character. So this character is created after the flood, and as all Nephilim are created, and he is produced to offset the evil of Gilgamesh. But unfortunately, that plan doesn't work out, and they become the best of friends. So now we have in this epic of Gilgamesh story, a story of a giant surviving the flood and a procreation of a giant after the flood. Now we get to Ziazudra or Upnapishtim, and he is the Noah of the Sumerian flood myth. And he is the archetypical Nephilim evil king as well. He is everything Noah is not, and he is a demigod, and he is a giant, and he is of the polytheist belief system. And so on the macro level, the story seems similar, but when we get into the details, that's where the devil is, so to speak. And we find that this is either a copy of the Noah story, is from my biased perspective, or a separate telling from their belief system of giants surviving the flood. And you can look at that both ways, and people will have to make their own decisions on it. So, but when we do talk about polytheism, they talk about giants surviving the flood, and in a number of ways.
Now, I just got your book in the mail a couple days ago. Do you cite the sources for? Were you saying that a number of ways?
One of the things that people are most impressed with my book is the amount of notes that I have in there. So there is over 100 pages of endnotes, and it's all there for everybody to look up. That's one of the things that, again, people like is not only are they liking the story, but they're liking all these other sources that they can now go to start looking some of this up.
Oh, yeah. Footnotes are my friend and my enemy.
Yeah.
When I see them, I get real excited. I'm like, wow, that's awesome. I can go figure out, where they got this information. But what happens is, and it sounds like probably the same way, I have easily 5 to 6 books at all times in various stages of completion.
Yeah.
Because I put one aside to go read the, whatever. I'm like, oh, I'll never get these all done.
Guilty.
Guilty as charged, huh? Yeah. Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad. That should keep me busy for a while when I finally do dive into it.
Yeah. So that's and when we talk about these aspects, and again, whether or not you get into the beta ones with Manu, and I'll cite that in a chapter with the Kulian and Amaka Seth, which is a Gnostic gospel individual. It's another creation of a giant, and he survives the flood by going up in a cloud. And the Manu survives an ark with the 7 stages to replant the world with the knowledge to restart civilization afterwards. What I'm doing in this section is I'm not trying to give credibility to the other belief systems. I'm letting them speak for themselves.
Right.
And I'm letting them tell their story in their own words.
Wow.
And looking at how it parallels the Genesis story, except it has a different perspective. It is all from paganism, polytheism, from the fallen angels that were ruling the earth as gods before the flood.
Yeah, that was really my take on a lot of the Sumerian epics and stuff like that. Was basically they're just telling the story from their point of view. That and we know even in our own history is written by the victor, which means it's not necessarily correct. It can be very biased. And so a lot of these stories that were written, like in the Sumerian epics and stuff like that, were them just putting their own slant on it, and then basically. About 850 years or so after the flood, God calls this guy Moses up to a mountaintop and says, "Okay, get a pen. Are you ready? This is what really happened."
Yeah, and I'll also introduce in this third section about the Aztecs, and not necessarily Aztecs as the original belief system, but take it back to the Quiché Maya and the Popol Vuh and the Toltecs and the Olmecs. And again, the survivors from this Atlantean story with the god or demigod, because it's not clear to me which, that Quetzalcoatl came across to civilize the Mayan and the Toltecs and the Olmecs. But this story, whether it's Osiris in Egypt or several other ones that traveled after the flood to different sections of the earth to replant civilization, and the giants and these antediluvian civilizations, they are constitutive constants in polytheism, and they all tell the same story. And there's, whether or not we want to believe that all of these other people survived or not, that's not really, again, my point. What I'm trying to zero in on is that there's stories of giants that are related to the flood. And there's giants before the flood, and there's giants after the flood. And at the end of the day, everybody's going to have to come to their own conclusion how that is. And there are, to me, 3 different ways that could have happened. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's always sort of the big debate in the Nephilim research community. How did they come back after the flood? Because obviously they're there. I mean, they're running into cedar tree size Amorites and stuff. So clearly they're there. And what really drives me crazy is whatever theory you subscribe to, somebody's always saying, well, that's absurd. Why would God allow that? I'm like, well, he's allowing it no matter how you look at it. So whatever your pet theory is, we both end up with the exact same result. And that result is he wanted them there for whatever sovereign reason, because they are afterwards.
Absolutely. And again, I mean, I look at it, there's 3 ways that they survived. They survived with an ark or some other survival system if they did survive. The second one would there be a procreation after the flood? And then the other one, which the Gnostics do talk about, is somehow as part survivors on the Noah ark that the giants survived. Now, I don't, in my book, spend much time on whether or not the wives were the seed of the giants, or Ham is, as the Gnostics would suggest, or that it's anybody else on the ark, because I couldn't find enough compelling argument that was consistent to what the Bible was saying from the other sources. So I basically gave examples of how I think you could look at the Bible from, again, and I know people will say, well, just because there was Nephilim before and after doesn't mean that there was a procreation after. But from that perspective, you could interpret it that way. I will provide compelling arguments from other sources. If that did happen, here's some other sources that says where, and those sources generally suggest in Chaldea with Gilgamesh, not with Gilgamesh, with Enkidu, and the other one would be Sodom and Gomorrah, which I'll talk about, because Sodom and Gomorrah was the cities of light and knowledge and the start of the regeneration of the giants after the flood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've got about a minute or so before the break, but if you've got your Bible handy, I want to throw 2 verses at you for you to consider and chew on before we come back. When we come back after the break, we'll talk about them. That's Genesis chapter 9, verses 18 and 19. I'd love to get your take on Genesis 9, 18, and 19, and then maybe we can segue over to Genesis chapter 10 after that, specifically focusing on chapters 10, verses 6 through 20. That should take us on some interesting journeys after after the break. But
I think it's going to be a great discussion.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I mean, when I did my research in my Archon Invasion book, I tried to limit it to the Hebraic sources, meaning the canonized texts, as well as books like Enoch, Joshua, and Jubilees, but still being fully aware of what the Sumerian epics and some of the other ones had to say. I put those aside for another book. Unlike you, I didn't put out an 800-page book. Mine was 300 and change, and I said, okay, I'm going to stop here, and I'll get to that stuff later.
I took 25% out so I could get it published.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that. That's like crazy, man. I've been, 1,000-something pages?
Yeah, about 1,100.
All right, we'll talk about it when we come back.
with Chris and Shuri Geo. Friday and Saturday on Truth Frequency Radio.
And the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan, which I find rather interesting that he decides to throw that in there. Next verse. These are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth populated. So, to me, from a biblical standpoint, anyway, that's a pretty conclusive statement. The whole world, 850 years after the flood, at a time when giants were running rampant in the land of Canaan, which the spies would then later see. The land is full of these guys of great stature. The land consumes itself, etc., etc. Moses says, point blank, the whole world was populated by these three guys.
Or the people were scattered over the earth from these people, depending on which translation that you're looking at on that. So I understand that point, and that's a very, very, very clear point. So if the point is that other people didn't survive the flood, then the giants must have come from them, and if so, how? And I don't discount that. But I also don't look at that as being absolutely, I would say, let's see, what's the right word, conclusive.
Well, yeah, if you were to take, see, this is where people get real funny, because some people will go completely ballistic on you if you do anything but sola scriptura. If you deviate from the canon, they'll go berserk on you.
Yeah.
But
so, and the reason why I say that is sorry to interrupt, Rob, is that if we look at a few other people that are in the Old Testament, in several of the books, and so you've got other giants that aren't related to the descendants of Canaan, whether they be Anak or Rephaim, or and I'll make a case in my book, Amalekites, and I'll make some other ones. And I do make distinctions between certain kinds of giants and the ones that either came from the Ham lineage or the Canaanite lineage, or that Japheth and some of the sons and descendants of Noah married into them to become hybrid giants. But where I'm going with this is, if I didn't lose my train of thought, is that there are other peoples that aren't giants that are listed, and so there's like the Kenizzites and the Kenites as two that come to mind right off the top of my head, and they don't go back into the Table of Nations, and their history would suggest that at least they believe, or as people have talked about them, is that they take their lineage back to Tubal-Cain and to Cain. And then there's the Gerzites and the Geshurites as well, which has the sort of same kind of connotation to the Amalekites and who they married to, and the unknown existence of the Horites. And again, I know there's, and we'll probably be getting into this because you and I are really into this as giant geeks. Was there a error made in describing the Horites and the Hivites? And you may not go there, I don't know, but I know that's one of the arguments that are out there. But my point is that there's these other people that don't go back to the descendants at all in the Table of Nations, and they sort of come out of nowhere.
Wow.
Let's see. Genesis 10, 15 through 19 talks about the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Arkites, Sunites, Arvadites, Zamorites, and Hamathites. And all of those are mentioned in many of, or not all of them, the majority of them anyway, are mentioned several times throughout the Torah as well as the book of Joshua as those that are marked for utter destruction.
Sure, but it also doesn't include the Abites, doesn't include the Amites, the Ozim, the Zamzunites, and other peoples, right? So I'm not disputing that the Hittites or the Hivites, and certainly the Amorites, weren't larger people, and they may have been giants, or they could have been hybrid giants. They could have been offspring, interbred in a larger form. For me, it's an either or. All I do know is they were totally corrupted after the flood, and that they were considered giants in most sort of writings. But were they pure Nephilim? That would be the argument.
Numbers 13:33 says that these were Nephilim that came from other Nephilim. So, and clearly after the flood, you start to see a marked decrease in size.
Yeah.
From like upwards, if we take a cedar tree at Amos 2:9 as a scale, a small, modest cedar tree gets to 35 feet. The cedars Lebanon got to 150 feet, but erring on the small side. Let's say the Amorites were, as described by Amos, cedar tree size, but when you get to Og of Bashan, who is an Amorite, he's only 13 to 15 feet, depending on how you read. And Goliath.
Well, depending on whether it's a royal cubit or a common cubit. Right.
That's why I say depending on who you read, depends on what cubit they're going with. And Goliath, same thing. He's anywhere from 9 to 12 feet. So they're definitely shrinking, but the Amorites, they're mentioned 85 times, I believe, in Scripture, and the Philistines are mentioned over 200 times.
Yes.
And the Philistines come from Caphtor, son of Mitzrayim, son of Ham, stepped off the ark, but no mention of angels. So
I'll connect them back to being either a hybrid giant or a purebred that goes way back, like what you're saying. But when you're talking about Og and Sihon as being Amorite, they're also Rephaim.
Yeah.
And they were noted in Deuteronomy and in, what's the other passage? Deuteronomy. Anyways, that's the last Rephaim, last of the Rephaim. The remnant of the Rephaim, depending on which translation, and one even is as the last surviving Rephaim. And that's Joshua 12:4 and Deuteronomy 3:11. And what I find really odd on that, because that's why you want to be very careful, or people ought to be very careful to being too dogmatic, even though I want to be, and I know everybody wants to be, is how could they be the last of the Rephites? Because, and I'll trace all the way down, and I'll come back to a couple, maybe some more examples in around this time, but I'll trace Goliath in the Goliath story as being a Rephaim. And we know there was more Rephaim that were around after Og. So unless they're talking about a pure race that is distinct and different than the Amorites, it's hard to fathom why they would say that. But again, I don't like to get too dogmatic on what any one saying says, because I think the Bible adds to it. It doesn't contradict itself.
Yeah, I agree. It does not contradict itself. It's taking a strictly biblical worldview, not paying attention to any of the other writings. It seemed to me that all of the biblical giants that we read about traced back to the people of Genesis 10:6-20. And Doug Hamp actually did a really good job of tracing where the various names came from, and how, in many cases they weren't different classes or different breeds or what have you. It was just the way a different people said, that, well, we call them this, well, they call them this. And he was showing in Scripture how it, in many places, actually says that. I forget which ones they were. Let's say these guys call them the Amims and these guys call them the Zamzamims. So he was showing how there was the tie. And when I was looking at the Rapha,
biblically, Rob, to underline your point, is that Anak, we're told, send from Nephilim, but we're also told that Anak are Rephaim. So you've got one or two breeds there, because they're all saying the same thing. And then you have the vernacular names that come in. And then there's the Amalekite Horite thing that might be a little bit different case.
Yeah. Well, in any case, they're back.
They're back.
they're back and in the land and doing their thing. Do you think, well, let me ask you this. Why do you think a large population of them settled the land of Canaan?
Well, I think they were instructed by their gods and their religion and their priests my view, all of this works together both before and after the flood. And that's what my book speaks to. So they would have known that when the earth was split up in Deuteronomy 32, that the land of the covenant, the land of Israel as we know it, was God's land.
Yeah,
and that
right.
They would have known that if there was going to be a challenge to the giants, that this land was going to go to the people of the hope of, of humankind, the future Israelites. And I write in my book that they deliberately went there and laid in wait in ambush to prevent the nation of hope from fulfilling their destiny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me ask you this: would you care to elaborate on why that land is God's land?
Good question.
What I could not find out anything in my research as to why he chose that land, other than he did choose that land.
I don't know if you probably haven't seen the series I did called the Yahuwah Triangle. In part 2 of it was a 3-part series that I added 2 other parts to it after I finished it. But when it was a 3-part series, it's part 2. Finding the Garden of Eden, and a show through the Bible that I believe Abram at the time was the key to showing us where the garden was and where the 2 trees were in the garden.
Wow!
And so,
and that would make sense.
Canaan is the garden, the land of Canaan that we now call Israel, is the Garden of Eden.
And that's interesting. If you get a chance, send me some information on that, because that's kind of one of those things that I've wondered about as to why that area was chosen. Yeah. I would have liked to have said Eden, but I couldn't find anything to back that up. So yeah, I think that's terrific, and I think that's also one of the points about all of the people that write in this genre is it shouldn't be competitive. I think the whole thing is about how do we learn more about it and how do we advance the knowledge, and everybody has their expertise and everybody has their contribution. And I think most of the time people are in agreement whether or not they want to get split off on a nuance here or not. That's the small picture. The big picture is there's more and more information coming out all the time because of writers like yourself, and hopefully I can be considered part of that crowd as well.
Yeah, well, that's why we do shows like this and try to network and compare notes. And Paul says we all look through the glass dimly, and the way I interpret that is like we're all looking at the same big picture from different angles of this dented, blurry glass. And I got a little bit of detail here. Oh, you got a bit of detail there. Well, let's put them together, and maybe we can piece together the overall picture.
Right.
If we can all.
Yeah, and I think that's the way we do learn about these things, because this subject is, as you know, it was probably one of the things that you found frustrating is it's been sort of shelved in Christianity, and there's no mention of science or anybody pursuing this. And you are really out there if you're pursuing this sort of inquiry and belief that this actually happened. So the more we can get this information out, the more credibility it brings to the whole genre.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let me go back to your website here. Zep Tepi. Always been intrigued by Zep Tepi. You've got that chapter 18 the first time. What's up?
Yeah. So again, this section 3 is the global testimony about the antediluvian period and the giants and the flood and what it was like. And so Zep Tepi comes from the Egyptian version of the antediluvian world, again filled with giants. And again, they have their hierarchy of gods. That goes back to the antediluvian epoch, that is again trying to be replicated after the flood. So what is Zep Tepi? That's the first time. That's what that translates to. That's the golden age that you'll hear of, whether it's in Roman mythology or in Greek mythology. And you'll hear that in a number of mythologies, but it's this time of plenty. It's this time of Eden. It's this time of long lives and no disease and all this food. And this is talked about whether it's in Atlantean mythology or in subcontinent Indian mythology or even in North American Aboriginal mythology anywhere around the world with this golden age that took place that went awry. And it went awry because of the introduction of these giants who started to slaughter people, who even drank blood, and that's where the whole vampire thing comes in. And I'll talk more about that in my book, in later aspects of the book. And the whole world became corrupted, and the gods had to bring about the flood to start anew again. So again, Zep Tepi is just another story of the first time. And what I do in that chapter is I bring in a whole bunch of other things about Egyptian gods and things like that, just to give some education and again show the consistency in the story from around the world.
Still glaring. Hang on, guys.
You can definitely see that. I mean, not only just in their stories, but in architecture and stuff like that. What's your take on the worldwide creation of pyramids?
Well, I don't buy the standard chronology by Egyptologists, and I'll give some examples as to why in my book, from why they're dated to before the flood. So I don't buy that. But the real issue to me is who built them. And I do believe they are older than the 23 to 2400 BC that Egyptologists like to date it to. But it's interesting that when you get into the Freemason history of the antediluvian world and their mythology, and I use their mythology and their legends extensively, particularly when we're talking about the legends of Enoch and we're talking about the evil Enoch here and his descendants, is they actually attribute that this building skill of masonry was used to build these monuments and inclusive of the pyramids. But that's letting them talk for themselves.
Yeah. When you read the book of First Enoch, you see that he was shown all kinds of, the heavenly tablets, and he was seeing the heavenly books, and he had full knowledge of all of them. And he came back for a period of time before he was finally raptured, and he was not, for God took him. He taught everything to Methuselah. And then you read Josephus's account on it, and he said that the sons of Seth were the ones who built a monument in Egypt that was based on a prediction that Adam had that the world was going to be destroyed twice, once by fire and once by water. So they were to build two structures, one of brick in case the fire was first, and one of stone in case the flood was first. Well, we know the flood was first. And by Josephus's description, I would say it certainly sounds like that the monument of Isaiah chapter 19, which is also described as being in the center and the border of Egypt, is the Great Pyramid of Giza, most likely the architect thereof being Enoch, passing the blueprints on to Methuselah in the house of Seth. And then other ones seem to be copycats.
Yeah, but let's also bring into this discussion as well the ziggurats of Sumeria.
Yeah.
And so a little bit different construction format, but still the same type of sacred geometry involved, still building a mountain. And I wonder whether or not, and the same thing that happens at Babel after the flood, and I wonder whether or not they're trying to recreate Mount Hermon.
Oh, interesting.
And inviting the gods to come back down and do either another procreation. And also what's interesting about the Babel Tower is we look at the translation from a Hebrew perspective where that means the confusion of languages. But from the Akkadian translation, that is the gateway of the gods.
Yeah.
So El being God and Bab being gateway.
Yeah.
And so I wonder whether or not there's a lot of that religious sort of symbology that's going on there. And also in the Freemason, and believe me, you can't believe how much information the Masons have on this. They believe that the people in the antediluvian time were organized into communities and into civilizations to build monuments to worship the gods, and great monuments. And then in the other legends, that's where you get into the other ones where possibly it was them and their sciences that built the pyramids before the flood.
Yeah.
I don't know who built them.
Yeah, well, I mean, all of us would be speculating anyway, because especially like the Great Pyramid, which is funny because most of these temples and whatnot in Egypt have hieroglyphs all over the place. It's honoring the pharaoh or the campaigns of whoever was alive during the time it was being built, and they're really proud of their stuff. But here you have the most impressive structure on this earth that doesn't have any writing on it, or at least if it did, it may have been on the 144,000 casing stones that have been since removed. Yeah, it just seems really bizarre, unless it wasn't meant to ever honor a pharaoh, unless it had another purpose.
If it had any that was of this world, like they'd be, in that position, they'd be honoring themselves. They'd be falling all over themselves to get their inscriptions on it some way. And the Egyptians have left a lot of inscriptions.
Ooh, yeah.
That was built into their culture. And, we have the same type of pyramids over in Central America. And again, archaeology likes to date those again to being, a couple thousand years old at the oldest. But again, if you talk to the people there and their mythologies, is that they say they didn't build them. It goes back into prehistory. And then there's Machu Picchu, and you've got all these different things that were going on before the flood that just make no sense from what modern secular science and archaeology likes to tell us. And when you're talking about hieroglyphs, and again, this is coming from what the Freemasons believe, and Enoch, the son of Cain, they believe, and also Orientalist writers, but they're Gnostic and polytheist as well. But so understand that bias. They believe that Enoch invented the first writing and the hieroglyphs as part of this development of these sciences. And they did that so that they could keep track of the knowledge and keep track of the laws and the rituals for this new sun-worshipping religion that they were developing, that Enoch the evil was, because he was a sun worshiper. And I'll talk all about this in the book.
Do you, I don't remember if I asked you this last time or not, but I'll ask it again either way. Do you believe that the Tower of Babel was built over or in the same region or vicinity of a previous structure that may have?
Yes, and Eridu is the place, as I recall.
Yeah.
And I'll give some Sumerian mythology that backs that up, and it's a story of Babel that is pretty much identical, but again from a polytheist perspective at Eridu. And what you also might find amazing is I'll also give an example of a Babel being built that is in the Aztec and Central American mythology.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying that, what I'm not saying on that is that there is different Babels around the world. All I'm saying is I find it amazing that we have Genesis account being duplicated again in other religions around the world.
Yeah.
And they also, these other ones will bring in giants as helping in the construction, and that the builders of Babel and Babel cities were able to draft these giants to help them or enslave them, depending on which mythology that you're looking at.
Yeah.
Now, again, I want to state this just for the listeners again, because I did on the last show, just so that people don't misunderstand what I'm saying, is I weigh everything on what the Bible says.
Yeah.
And I add this other stuff as context and say, okay, here's another source of saying the same thing, but this is what the Bible says.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we got to have a standard for truth, and I'm the same way. It's like, okay, this is the touchstone, so we can look at this other stuff, and it's valuable information.
Yeah.
And where it does not contradict with Scripture, wonderful. You might have a few more pieces to add to the puzzle. Where it does contradict, well, I'm going to err on the side of Scripture then, and it's like it chew the meat, toss the bones kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's also one of the reasons why I didn't go too far down the line of either the wives or the sons being the source of the giants after the flood, because that's a distinctly Gnostic belief, and from not necessarily the wives, don't talk about the wives, but from either Tubal-Cain or from Ham as being a giant that was inserted into the last survivors to survive the flood. So I'd like to be kind of careful on that I don't like to inject something that I know can't be true.
Oh, well, this is where we would definitely differ. I don't know where you get that it's a Gnostic source, and if somebody believed that. But for me, I've not read Gnostic material. I've stuck strictly with the Bible and came to the conclusion that all the post-flood giants trace directly back to the occupants on the ark, most notably Ham, but also Japheth, because Gog and Magog throughout history were known as giants.
Yeah, and what's kind of interesting on that, because again, it's an either or, but if we're saying then that the sons of Noah were giants.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
No.
So then if they're not giants, then it's got to be the wives.
That's all you're left with. And
that's all you're left with.
They don't need to be giants either. Because I don't believe a Nephilim is strictly a giant. I think when you talk about the animal-human hybrids, the satyrs and all that stuff, they were every bit as much a Nephilim as it's an abomination. It's a hybrid. It's, oops, off the break. We'll talk about that when we come back.
No hate, no hype, no.
But could be just hybrids in general. And one of the reasons I would say that is because in Numbers 13:33, it says that the Nephilim that they encountered were Nephilim that came from other Nephilim. So you have at least two types of Nephilim then. You have angel-human hybrid Nephilims, and you have hybrid Nephilims that were the result of Nephilim mating with either other humans or other Nephilim or what have you. And I simply extend that definition to include things like satyrs and minotaurs and centaurs and these creatures that are depicted by numerous ancient cultures. So I wanted to get your take on that. Do you think that they, with all the cultures making depictions, carvings, paintings, and whatnot of animal-human hybrids, do you think that was all just, everybody being inspired artistically to create fiction, or do you think there was some basis in reality to those creatures?
Yeah, I think it's so heavily tied to their religion and their mythology that I don't believe it's imagination.
Yeah.
And so let's look at the Minotaur, and in the modern Rex Deus mythology, they call it the Quinotaur, but it's the same animal. And this is the bull human hybrid, whether it's DNA or sexual copulation. In this case, it's a god mating with a bull as punishment for King Minos, as I recall. And so this Minotaur eats babies, and people believe that the Minotaur is the same belief system and possibly the base for Moloch of the Bible, who also had babies sacrificed to him. And so the story revolves around Nephilim again, and Theseus comes over to help free the Athenians who are being sent there for sacrifice every year, and overthrows the king and rescues everybody. But this is all part of the same mythology. And then we look at centaurs, and of course they were made in a cloud again. So is that like up in the heavens? Is that in a spaceship? Is it DNA manipulation? Who knows? But there's something going on that's consistent. And if we go over to India, they got some very exotic ones as well. They've got these gods that have elephant face, and some other really bizarre looking ones. And then we have the Pegasus, and on and on and on and on around the world. There's these very strange hybrids. I mean, there's too many to list. So I think, again, when you have that much and it's that common in so many cultures, it's demonstrating a common heritage. And so from that, my conclusion, even though it's speculative, is likely true.
Yeah. I was, when I was a missionary, I was able to go to Greece a couple times, and it was on my second trip that I was hanging out in Cyprus and Athens and all in that general area there. And you can't really look anywhere without seeing the toppled remains of a temple or a statue of a god or some representation of a animal-human hybrid. I mean, it's like everywhere there. And I came back from that trip and I told my wife, I said, all those animal-human hybrids and like Greek mythology? She said, yeah. I said, it's just so prevalent, that I was thinking, if it's all just myth, like we were told, Homer's Odyssey and Iliad and all that was taught to us as mythology. Well, I mean, George Lucas said that he was creating a new mythology with Star Wars. And I was thinking to myself, man, 4,000 years from now, nobody's going to remember Yoda, but yet these people, the Greek people, I mean, it's still very much a part of their culture. And so much so that a friend of mine told me when I was referring to it as mythology, he said, Rob, stop. You keep calling this mythology, but in my schools where I grew up, they taught that to us as history. And I said to my wife, I said, I think that stuff was real. And, we had a nice conversation. She went to bed. Next morning, we both wake up and she's checking her email in the other room and says, come here. And I came in there and she had clicked on an RSS news feed that said that scientists had successfully cloned a sheep with a human heart. And the article went on to say, if we keep this up, eventually the genes are going to fuse together and we're going to end up with animal-human hybrids and have all the ethical issues that we're going to have to deal with, in that regard. I'm going, but that was like the next morning after I thought, I wonder if those were real. Well, they're real today.
Yeah, and to me, it's a little bit arrogant and dismissive to write off all of these mythologies around the world when those people from those areas believe it is their history. It's not just the Greeks.
Yeah.
They don't believe it's mythology.
Yeah, and it's a rather sobering thought when you realize that Yeshua said that the last days of Matthew 24:37 would be like the days of Noah. And anytime I talk about that, I always remind people, well, we always think of Noah's Ark. That's what he's most famous for. But the guy lived 950 years, 600 before and 350 after. And there's weird, wild, crazy, wacky stuff going on both sides of the flood. Do you think we're going to actually, do you think that the last days are indeed going to directly parallel the days of Noah?
I think there's going to be a lot of similarities from technology, advancing rapid, uncontrollable technology to hybrids, and if we look at Revelation, we already know that there's demons and there's these creatures who are probably the descriptions of fallen angels coming up out of the abyss. I think we were instructed by our Messiah to understand the days of Noah, and he even goes on to say, they were eating and drinking so that you understand it's around the flood period. And so I think it's got to do with all of those aspects of what was happening in the first apocalypse by water, the second apocalypse by fire. The circumstances are going to be the same. Again, that nothing is new under the sun. But even if it is after the flood, which I'm not part of that, I do recognize that Babel with Nimrod and Hermes and starting of the seven sacred sciences and mysticism, and again at Babel with the wise men and the Chaldeans and everything that flowed out of there afterwards. And Nimrod is an antichrist figure, and at least from a biblical perspective, those are the only people on earth, and he's got full sway like an antichrist with the universal religion that is the religion of Babylon. I think you can look at that on either side of the flood and say, take your own parallel. I'm comfortable with both.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a sobering thing. In fact, I had to get my wife's brakes and shocks, rotors replaced in her car. I was sitting in the lobby of the mechanic shop there, and there was a free publication called I think it's called the Dallas Observer, something like that. And on the front cover, it showed a X-ray of two hands with microchips embedded in their hands. So I thought, I'll check this out. So I'm reading the article, and the whole thing was about transhumanism and how there's this mad rush with people who like to tattoo themselves and pierce their tongue and their nose and whatever else and put things in their bodies, are like jumping all over this whole thing of putting microchips and things in their body to modify themselves. And it was like this whole rave thing that apparently Dallas is like a big hub for this techno hybridization transhumanism deal. And I'm like, wow. I mean, between that and what scientists are doing in the laboratory, I mean, we are rushing headlong right exactly into the days of Noah. And it's my feeling that Genesis 6:3, where it talks about that they had 120 years, was the warning flare that went off and said, basically, guys, if you don't knock it off, you've got 120 years, and then I'm going to wipe everything out. And I feel like we're now taking our steps into that last 120-year warning. Hello? I don't know. That was weird.
It's like it was like a jet flying over.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and it's interesting again, and then people, you can look at that 120 years. Is that the length of the life of the antediluvians before the flood, or was that limiting life to that age? And I know Josephus, who you like to quote, and I like to quote as well a lot. He actually notes that was the years that the giants were going to be permitted to live for. But again, we're slicing details on that, which when we get into this whole aspect of transhumanism, this is still the Nephilim doctrine, and it's the new man doctrine as modern understanding would have it, that came up with the progressive new movement and the Nazi movement with genetics, and transhumanism is just an extension of that. And if we look at how this connects through, and you talked about the knowledge exploding at Babel, and again, I'll talk about this in the book to a certain degree, that this is when the 7 second sciences were redeveloping at Babel under Hermes and Nimrod, and that anything that working together as one people in one language, nothing would really be preventable, or that they could almost do anything that they wanted. I think that's a reflection on this knowledge that they're talking about. But this whole knowledge-based, new man, Nephilim, superhuman thing is all part of this polytheist doctrine. And if you look at how science was created, it was started, the modern era of science transferred from, let's say, sorcerers and magicians, as they would call themselves, to the Royal Society in about 1660. Well, who was this society created for? And what was its purpose? Well, this was created all by Rosicrucians and Freemasons to honor the great architect of the universe and to find out knowledge and more knowledge about the great architect of the universe, who is Lucifer, in their belief system. All of this is the same story being told all throughout history. It's the same religion and the same philosophy.
Yeah, nothing new under the sun.
Nothing new under the sun.
Okay, let's get a little deeper here in your book. What's the people of the plain, chapter 28?
The people of the plain is just the story of the people coming down from Mount Ararat and just before Babel, and how Nimrod takes over. And so I'm telling in that, bringing in a lot of Jewish mythology, and they have a lot of history that they have in their mythology. And I'll use Louis Ginsburg as my main source for Jewish mythology, and he was considered one of the giants of getting the various myths.
No pun intended.
Yeah, so to speak. Yeah, and he has several books, so I lean on him to sort of bring some Jewish additional information to the table from a mythological perspective. And so I'm just sort of preparing at this point in that section of the book of the people of the plain for Nimrod and Hermes and what he had set up and what he tried to do in the chapters.
What I mean, I've always kind of joked about it. If their goal was to build a tall structure, why would they build it in a plain? It seems to me that if we go the route of an enclosed circular world under a dome, it may make a little bit of sense, but it seems like if they were actually trying to get into heaven, they would start on top of a mountain, unless it was some sort of a Stargate type of scenario. Is that sort of where you go with it, or what's the thought?
Yeah, it's a shrine for sure, or a monument, and to who? And it's obviously not a monument to God in terms of respect, because God doesn't let it be completed. So it's obviously then a sign of disrespect or honoring their own gods, and that arrives at the same end. And so a lot of the mythology will have Nimrod climbing up and creating these terrific speeches similar to an Antichrist figure on how if God ever gets out of line again, he'll find this ziggurat and he'll fire his arrows and he'll slay this evil God because he's not stronger than the gods that they worship. And this whole thing about why they built it is just honoring their gods, and it could be to recreate Herman as a Stargate, and this is speculative, but it could be. But I do believe there's a correlation there to honor Mount Herman where the giants were created, because the society that Nimrod created was like a Nephilim king would do. And so Nephilim or Nimrod would either be a Nephilim or a Nephilim hybrid or a Nephilim wannabe. I fall in the perspective, and a lot of people think he's giants, but I've come down on it just from my own research and speculation is that he probably wasn't, because he's in the Table of Nations, and but I also respect that a lot of people think that he was a giant. But at the end of the day, we have the giants, we have the 7 sacred sciences, we have a manifestation of this religion, these sciences, and what the giants like to do in a pyramid, which is what they were building, and it was either to have the gods rejoin them to procreate, rejoin them just to rejoin them, or it was to honor Mount Herman. All of it leads to the same end, in my opinion.
Yeah, I lean toward the idea that he was not born a Nephilim, but that he genetically modified himself because of the way it's worded, not only even in the English, but also in the Hebrew, but specifically the way it's translated in the Septuagint. That was a Genesis 10:8-9, I believe. It says in the Septuagint point blank that he became a giant. But the word began in Hebrew it's used, the same word is used elsewhere for defilement, prostitution, usually has some sort of sexual connotation to it. So at least it appears that through some sort of sexual manipulation of some kind, he may have modified himself. And I wonder, and it's speculation, but I wonder, because Jubilees tells you that Arphaxad had a son named Canaan, not spelled the same way as Canaan, and his name is omitted from the King James Table of Nations, but it's in the Septuagint. And Jubilees says that he found some writings after the flood from the Watchers, and all it says is, I think it's in Jubilees 8, if I remember, it says that he sinned because of it and hid it from Noah for obvious reasons. But if that's true, if this story is true, then he's a direct first cousin with Nimrod. So it kind of makes you wonder, did maybe these two get together and Nimrod, figure something out? I don't know.
Maybe.
Kind of weird.
Well, yeah, Nimrod is in the Bible because of his infamy.
Right.
What level of that infamy is, I mean, the Bible's quite stingy on him. But what we do know is what little is written there. He acted like a Nephilim, whether he was or not.
Yeah.
He was either one or he wanted to be one, but he certainly ruled like one and took it to an Antichrist-like figure.
Oh, certainly. I believe he's the first, absolutely the first Antichrist figure whose goal was to not only kill God, but set himself up as God. The Joshua account goes into a lot of detail describing what his plans were. And there's an interesting piece, though, where God does the judgment on them. There's 3 camps. They each had different assignments. In one camp, God caused them to just kill each other off. And one camp, he turned them into like apes and elephants. And you mentioned the Hindu pantheon earlier, and 2 of their big gods is Ganesha and Hanuman or something like that. Ganesha being the elephant head guy, and the other one being the monkey head guy. And so it kind of makes you wonder if that story is to be taken literally, if that whole group of people who went away from the Tower of Babel as mutants or some sort of abomination went off and settled the area of India and became the gods that we see over there.
Well, what we do know from history is that the religions of India, Buddhism, and then the religions that went to China, whether it's Confucianism and over to Japan, that's all has the same root that was exported out of Chaldea.
Yeah.
And I'll cover that information off for the reader in the book as well. So if that's true, And then, and if it's true that there was these elephant type figures that you were just talking about, and we have those elephant type figures of gods in the Vedas and in statues in India, makes sense.
Yeah.
And I wasn't aware of those elephant figures till tonight.
Yeah.
In your account.
Yeah, it's well, whatever the chapter is in Joshua that covers the Tower of Babel incident, describes that, and I was like, well, wait a minute, because I had been to India. I was a missionary in India for a while, and
oh wow,
you could see. I mean, those things are. I mean, wow, it's everywhere, you know. And they got some bizarre ones over there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So, and then of course the other third, the remaining third, were the ones that God confounded their languages. And so it's interesting because when you got the other third leaving the Tower of Babel, all talking about the same guy who was the emperor basically of the world at the time, Nimrod. Now he's taking on other names, and and then you start seeing various depictions of a sort of a hunter, war / agricultural god that many of which the synchronicity is too in your face to ignore. That it appears to have they funnel right back to this one guy. So
yeah, and I think the god the Nimrud that they merged them with in those writings.
Well, there's several. Ningirsu was an earlier representation of Ninurta, who was a war / agriculture god. That eventually they split. They took the agriculture part out, and the war part out made two different entities, you know, to symbolize those. And interestingly enough, those two are symbolized in the front entrance of our nation's Capitol building. You have Mars on one side and Ceres on the other.
Yeah. Amazing how that happens. All the other Egyptian symbolism that's also in Washington.
Yeah, yeah, big time. Well, okay, let's see. Moving on. Let's see what else we have. Okay, what is when you're talking about the curse of the Amalekites?
Mm-hmm. Curse of the Amalekites. Okay, so that is following the destruction of the Amalekites, and the curse comes from Moses and from God for attacking the Israelites when they were still sort of a worn-torn, ragtag tribes of, you know, slaves that had just come out of Egypt. So Amalek, who is from another line of Abraham. So you have, when that split up, you had Jacob and you had Esau, and so Amalek descends from Esau, I believe it's his grandson, and so the Amalekites are these people that are trying to usurp the Abraham covenant, the Messianic covenant, and the birthright covenant that they thought their ancestor should have had, but they did not get it, and so they attack Israel first when they're weak and not ready for battle and trained, and Moses and God look upon that, and most of the listeners out there who are familiar with the Bible will know this story, that they looked upon that in disdain as the worst thing possible. And so this curse remains, and the Israelites are instructed that after they've taken the promised land and they have a land of peace, that then they will go back and take out their curse on the Amalekites. But the Amalekites, the reason why I'm talking so much about the Amalekites is that there was a giant in prehistory named Amalek, and that it's not clear whether or not Amalek of Esau started the tribes and nations of Amalek, or this descendant of Esau actually took the name of the Amalekites. And so when I look at sources, whether it's Unger's or Nelson's on dictionaries and encyclopedias on that, this Amalekite nation is very, very unclear, and I'll make a case in the book that they're probably the Horites. Or there's two different tribes there, but they have this ancient sort of history, and they have this antediluvian connection, and I'll follow that through. But at the end of the day, they were either a hybrid set of giants, a purebred set of giants, and I'll lay both of those cases out. and they attacked Israel right in the beginning of the Exodus. And when I'll make a case further on in the book with King Saul and King David that part of their covenant, their kingship covenant, was to finish dealing with these giants and wipe them out, and Amalek was included in that.
Yeah, we just read it in the Torah portion last weekend in the book of Exodus that there's basically never going to be any peace for the Amalekites. God's just gonna, he's got a vendetta.
Well, and what makes them unique is the Amalekites swore a blood covenant to wipe Israel from the face of the earth.
And God's like, oh yeah?
And so the punishment was leveled in equal proportions to them because secular history does not record the Amalekites.
Oh, interesting.
Only in biblical history. And so it is absolutely divine proportioned judgment for how they were judged and what they were trying to do. Again, I do believe that they were trying to usurp the birthright and the Messiah birthright in as part of taking that whole succession of those gifts into the Nephilim bloodline.
Okay.
So, and I'll lay that out in the book, so that kind of makes some sense. Because you are talking about two different peoples. You've got the Amalekites that descend, as the grandson of Esau, and then you've got marrying into these tribes in the land of Seir, and where do these people come from? And they amalgamate into this great Amalekite nation.
Well, Ishmael marries into the Canaanites, and later Esau marries into the Ishmaelites.
Yeah.
So, and Arab means mixture.
Yes.
And so
I never knew that.
It seems to me that's where we see the bloodline crossing over, was when that happened. Assuming the Canaanites are in fact by and large Nephilim. Back to much more.
The Kev Baker Show with Kevin Drew, Monday through Thursday on Truth Frequency Radio.
What you've written.
You can get my book through my website, www.genesis6conspiracy.com. If you want a signed or personalized copy, that's genesis6conspiracy.com with a 6. It's also available through Amazon, Amazon.com, CA, all the Amazon onlines around the world. It's also available through Barnes & Noble, online and through their stores. They're not stocking it in Barnes & Noble on the stores, but they can order it. It's also available on most online bookstores around the world. And if you want to go into your local Christian store, to the bookstore to buy it, you can get it through them as well if you would like to support them. My book is distributed by Send the Light Distribution, who supplies the Christian bookstores. If you're looking to follow me, you can follow me at Gary Wayne 63 on Twitter or on Facebook as Gary Wayne, and I also have a couple of Genesis 6 conspiracy pages on there as well.
Yeah, and I can say if you go to his website, Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and that's with the number 6, Genesis number 6 conspiracy.com. You can click on the tab where it says the book, and he's got section 1 through section 8 there. And what I've done is clicked on section 1, and he's got little snippets, don't you? You get it's like you've given a generous portion that looks like from each of the chapters for people to read.
I have a very generous portion so that they can get a bit of a flavor and a bit of a flavor as to how much information is going to come at them.
Yeah, And so we've been sort of going down the column on the right side there. When you click on that, he's got his chapter outline there. So I'm just kind of going through them and sort of randomly picking some interesting things to talk about. What about the chapter 40, the new man? What's going on what's the new man?
Well, now we're moving into the modern period, and so I end the section 3 with the Goliath story and the Avite and King David and his men hunting down the last of the Rephaites in the land of the covenant. At least that, as far as we're told in terms of the Bible of the giants. So now I'm moving things forward into modern time, because I want people to understand that what happened in prehistory is very relevant to what's going on today in all aspects. And so section 4, where the new man is that I am making a transition into biblical prophecy and how things were similar back in the time of Noah as what they are today. So in the chapter of the new man, we're talking about different aspects about what a modern Nephilim might look like, and that we're very quickly closing in on the ability to do our own DNA manipulation, if that's what we want to do to create superhumans. Or could it be a alien DNA manipulation, and start talking about maybe who these aliens are, and I'll cover more of that as the book unfolds, whether they're demons or different species or fallen angels. But certainly if we look at prehistory, there was a DNA manipulation. And I'll also start to introduce the concept of the new man concept, which is the modern incantation that we've talked about of a superhuman, whether it's bigger, stronger, smarter, lives longer, whatever. It's the same philosophy that's going today that was in prehistory. And of course, now the popular word is transhumanism. So I'm just easing the reader into where we're starting to go.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so segueing from that then to the age of Aquarius.
Yes, and again, talking a little bit more of the age that we're in and how the polytheists will look at it, that they have end time beliefs and end time prophecies as well. Whether they're 100% accurate or not, but they do have this rendezvous with destiny, this new age where there will be the opposite of what we think as to who's going to be the weeds and pulled out, and that the age of Aquarius is the new age millennium. And I'm now introducing this belief system into and sort of shadowing what it does with prophecy. And that they also believe that in the new age of Aquarius, that this epoch ends in apocalypse as well, and by fire. And I'll lay that out in terms of how they believe that. So again, just sort of moving us forward into some of the more major prophetic aspects of what section 4 will talk about.
Okay. So yeah, it looks like we're moving progressively into more, deeper territory, at least from our context anyway, segueing into the modern times and the New World Order and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so section 4 is, I mean, most Christians will be quite familiar with prophecy, and I'm just laying out not a detailed aspect of all of prophecy, because those are many, many books in themselves, but just like the major issues of prophecy, and introducing what the other side talks about, preparing them for what I'm going to talk about in the rest of the book, and that how they're going to bring about the end time.
Yeah, excellent.
And also introducing characters and thoughts and philosophies, whether it's the secret societies or the alien phenomena or the Gnostic religion, or terms like the disciples of light and the children of light, who these people are. But it's not in super long detail, because we're trying to cover off in here just the main characters, and then the last sections will really start to dig into these aspects.
Very cool. So then what is the sign of Noah?
Well, the sign of Noah is essentially the what we had talked about earlier in terms of what Jesus had said about the days of Noah.
Okay, so it's this,
and it will be like the end time. And so again, I create the parallel, and just because I'm also trying to hit readers that aren't familiar with the Bible. And so I'm going to say what the New Testament says about what the end times is going to look like in terms of people and what it looks like and what happened in antediluvian times. And I'll sort of parallel those in a couple of chapters there.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'll also move, as we're moving forward into here, we'll get into the Babylon chapter, Babylon City, and I'll describe who Babylon is. And I'll break down Babylon as being a combination of almost government-like, but a religious government that works with the New World Order, but a religious center and a business center of the world. And that this
Sounds
is the
like
New
the
Atlantis.
Catholics.
This is Tyre, as Isaiah describes Tyre and its destruction and what Tyre was like. And I'll use three sort of metaphors from the Old Testament. One would be Tyre, the other one will be Babylon, and I will also use Nineveh to describe the different aspects of what this future Babylon was described by the Old Testament prophets. And I'll also link in that from the polytheist perspective that this is their new Atlantis city.
So so Babylon is a model for the new Atlantis?
Yes.
So then
Babylon is the new Atlantis
okay.
from a city perspective and from a religious dominated government perspective.
Yeah, an ideology.
Yes.
So I know several scholars who subscribe to the idea that the United States is Babylon. I personally do not share that belief, but I do believe that we are fully immersed in a Babylonian system, and that Francis Bacon and company had the whole idea behind setting America up was for America to be the new Atlantis.
Well, a model for the new Atlantis.
Yep.
Yeah, or to bring it about.
Yes, and to be a significant player in bringing it about.
Yeah.
And now what they're trying to do is reel it in. And so the new Atlantis would operate similarly with not as many states or empires, but maybe they are within the empires. But so you have one central government, and you have these mini states that are working together. And so they have a split of power, but the main power and the tax levers and everything is in the central side. And they don't really care whether it's democracy or a dictatorship. They'll push it from either side. But eventually the democracies will be usurped.
Yeah, or Democrat or Republican.
Yeah.
we end up down the same path either way.
Yeah. And so I will give all Babylon is to really start to coalesce what the end time is going to start to look like from a religious perspective, but not from a government perspective, even though this dominates the government, and that Babylon has to take place first before the New World Order empire takes place. So it's just one of my personal doctrines. Not that I'm going to stand on it as being infallible, but if I look at prehistory, is I look at a number of things that are consistent. So, at Babel, for example, we had the religion first, and then we had the government, and then we have the Antichrist figure. And in the antediluvian time, we had Enoch and the religion, and then we had the Nephilim come along, and they're trying to establish their world government, and then one rises to a level of Antichrist-like figure. I think it's going to be kind of similar in this end, so that the Antichrist actually just sort of takes this whole thing over when they usurp three of the empires. Yeah,
when our troops pulled out of Iraq in 2011, December, there were a bunch of reports that followed showing how we left 500 military bases. We built the largest embassy in the world in the ancient Babylon area, and we left behind hundreds of millions of dollars of state-of-the-art military equipment. And my comment at the time was, wow, we sure did set somebody up. Here you go. It's all set for whenever you're ready.
Yeah, what did we think was going to happen by doing that?
Yeah, they were saying, well, sometimes it's too costly to ship these things back. I'm like, really? It costs more in shipping than it does in manufacturing to make an M1 Abrams tank? Really?
Yeah, really. And somehow it's a good idea to fund all of these rogue factions that are over there with weapons. I don't think so.
So, well, you've got an interesting chapter 45. It just caught my eye. Reflections from within the Third Reich.
Yeah. So what I'm laying out here is because I'm throwing a lot of things at people, and I'm going to throw a lot more as the next chapters roll out. Is let's now talk about a semi-modern parallel example that we can look on that will be very similar to the end time, and that's what the Nazi regime is. And the Nazi regime has the Antichrist figure with Hitler, and it's trying to set up its Third Reich, which is a reign of 1,000 years, which is the false millennium. It has its own religion, and that's what people don't understand, that the Nazi regime had developed their own church by 1933, and it was distinctly anti-Christian and distinctly anti-Semitic. And this regime and this movement was set up by the secret societies and Theosophy, which developed into what they slanted into a version called Ariosophy. That's the Aryan aspects that's coming in. And so they were imposing their own religion. They had their own government set on world government, that they wanted to take over the whole world. And I know some people dispute that, but Hitler wanted to have the whole world. And he was going to have his religion over the whole world. And we have the Holocaust that took place with the Jewish people. And what's really interesting about this religion that Hitler had set up, it was distinctly not only Theosophy or Gnostic, but it was occultic. And it had its own variation, as we talked with Ariosophy. So they introduced a couple of concepts into Theosophy that made it distinctly Nordic and Aryan. And those two things are playing at the same time. So let's talk a little bit about Vril.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and that's a Rosicrucian doctrine, but it's a potency in the blood that will sponsor a future race of superhuman beings. Okay, so now we have this blood thing that's going on, and these super beings. And I know there's a lot of speculation of Rh negative. I'm not linking that. I think Rh negative is interesting. All I know is what the Vril is, and that's something special in the blood that comes out of prehistory that's going to produce super beings. And they overlaid another idea that was, and just before I move on that, Vril is also a belief in a doctrine based in race purity and bloodlines. And of course, these bloodlines go back to prehistory. And Volkisch ideology, also known as Das Volk or folk soul or the new man concept, again, to create this new Nephilim. So we have all of this brewing, just as what we did in antiquity and what will happen in the end time. And of course, Volkisch ideology that is overlaid on this religion and in their whole political doctrine, it's based on a hero cosmology or a hero collective. And when I talk about hero, I'm talking about ancient Greek and Atlantean heroes. And this is the inclusion into this Volkisch ideology of the Thule, which is the Aryan ancient or Aryan antediluvian society of Atlantis. And so they believe, as the Aryan concept, that they are descendants of these Aryans from Atlantis, or giants. And this whole blood Nephilim thing interbreeds. And so all of this comes together in this awful, horrible thing in Nazi Germany. And I think we can look back and I'll lay out a number of interesting things in this chapter for people to look at, that take a close look at this as a religion, as a government, as a belief system, as a political belief system, and what they did as to what's going to happen.
Yeah, they were, like, the Nazis were obsessed with this whole thing. But I read somewhere that, like, most of that came out of a fictional novel. But I guess you'd have to ask yourself, where did the person who wrote the so-called fictional novel get all this information?
Well, they relied on a number of people. It's not just any one idea, any one person. So I'll name a few just so that, and this also includes Grail mythology, and which is also why it fits in my book, because later, the next section of the book is going to get into the Holy Grail in those bloodlines and King Arthur. And again, this is all related. But so Helen Blavatsky would be the founder of Theosophy. So a very, very important figure influencing Nazi and its belief system. Then you have Stefan George, and he was a writer and a poet and a Gnostic of Theosophy and an occultist. And that's where he coins the word pure. And also Wagner is also heavily influencing the Nazi movement. And right after seeing a Wagner a concert, a theater, that's when in 1933, after that, for inspiration, Hitler goes out and announces his Reichschurch. There's von Liszt, there's Jorgen Lanz Liebenfeld, there's Bettendorf, there's so many other people that were affecting and pulling this whole thing together from all these whole bunch of different levels of Germanic society and different organizations that were also funding these groups. So we have different orders that were being developed. These are secret societies and rogue Freemasonry movements that are working together with this Volkisch ideology and this Gnostic religion. Some other important people that had heavy influence on this whole movement would be Dietrich Eckhart, for example, or Hans Horberger, or Elfin Rosenberger, who is probably one of the most important people in establishing the Nazi doctrine and was the Nazi theoretician. And he was also in the Thule Society, and Ernst Bergman and Rudolf Hess and the Teutonic Knights that they bring into the SS, which goes back to the Templars. This whole thing is absolutely immersed in this occultic long history, and it all manifests itself in what I believe is a similar parallel account of the end time, with Hitler being a wannabe Antichrist figure. And he looked at himself as a Messiah-like figure.
Well, I can imagine anybody who was living at that time, who was a student of Scripture, they had to have been thinking, this is it. This guy's got to be it.
Yeah, and the swastika logo comes right out of Eastern Buddhism and was adopted by Helen Blavatsky and several other of these people as their symbols and their seals that they were using on the writings and things at that time. And you also have to understand that Rosicrucian orders were a big part of this. And people talk about Aleister Crowley as being part of the Golden Dawn. Well, he associated and supported the Nazi movement. And the Nazi movement was also funded by the major banks. And the reason why they were bringing along the Nazi regime is another belief system that they had originally funded went rogue and got out of control, and that was communism. So they were placing Nazism in place to take care of the first problem, and then Nazism got out of the box and out of control.
Yeah. Do you think? The reports were that Hitler shot himself in the head, and end of the war and all that stuff. But recent forensic evidence shows that wasn't even a male skull that they had found, and that he apparently survived the war, took off to, some say, Argentina or Antarctica or whatnot. But the Nazis are still very much in power. I think they just sort of changed outfits.
Yeah, they are. Well, I mean, we have to factor in one other thing, that history is continually being rewritten by the leftists and the occultists and the Gnostics. And so progressives were just the Western sort of North American version of National Socialism. And so National Socialism has been rebranded by our education system as right-wing fanatics, but they are a socialist movement. They were a socialist movement, except that they partner with private enterprise as with oligarchies and or corporations. At the end of the day, they're kind of a similar term in terms of how they're used to further the state and the profit, so that all the wealth belongs with the adepts. And so we have to understand that this reframing of Nazism today is just misinformation. They're lefting. The only thing that the Nazis, as National Socialism were right of, was pure socialism, communism, and anarchism. And most people don't realize this.
Well, but I mean, we with the space program and Project Paperclip, and I mean, we brought a whole bunch of these guys over here, and they basically just took over.
Yeah. Well, they were so far ahead on their technology.
Do you think they were tapping into with some pre-flood type stuff, or fallen angel technology, or Nephilim?
Well, they believe that they were talking to avatars and spirit guides and angels, and it's part of the theosophy belief system that you converse with them. So it is not beyond the possibility on that type of speculation that they receive knowledge to advance their weapons. I mean, it's something as mundane as their Tiger tanks, and the other tanks that they had were so far superior to what the Allies had. The only reason why they didn't succeed with that is because the Russians and the Allies, Western Allies, could produce way more through their, and so defeated them in sheer numbers. But now we move on to, where did the rocket technology come from?
Right, that's the big question.
Where did the single fixed wing stealth technology come from? Where did the jet engine come from? And I don't know where
the belt from, the Nazi bell.
That's what I was going to end up with, is where did that Nazi bell technology come from, and what was it, and why does it look like the tops of ancient monuments in the East, as in Vietnam or Thailand or places in Southeast Asia? It's unbelievable. And what were they going to do with that? So somehow, and they were able to do this in such a short period of time. They were a military non-factor in the late 20s. And by the early 40s, they are the most, or the late 30s, early 1940s, they're the most powerful military force on Earth. And couple of years later, they've got these fancy weapons that they're developing that just come out of nowhere. Yeah. And they would have probably developed the atom bomb if the Allies hadn't bombed the heavy water plants.
Yeah, I mean, clearly something happened, something changed. I mean, they even talked about, we did receive inspiration or whatever from elsewhere. And then, of course, we got like a minute left of the podcast, but the big question is, why were they so obsessed with Antarctica? And, many say that that's where a lot of them went, and so did we. When you get into Operation High Jump and Deep Freeze and following, man, the United States, it was like, okay, here we have two world wars, pretty close to each other, and then of course we got Korea, and then getting ready for Vietnam and everything too. But then all of a sudden everybody's like, hey, let's go to Antarctica.
Well, they were obsessed with anything Aryan, and there's a lot of mythology that they're chasing that Atlantis actually exploding down to Antarctica, and the Grail hallows that they were chasing like crazy.
That's all we have.
Okay, that's finished, guys. Now do the second one. Is America Babylon? I don't know. I like to think it's the Catholics, but let's see what this video says.
Tyler, and it's good to be with you guys again.
It's great to be together again. And always, as always, guys, if you can show me a thumbs up in the chat, that way I know you hear us and everything is working well. I really appreciate it. So guys, tonight we're going to talk about a really, really interesting, thank you for the thumbs up, Richard, and a really, really controversial topic. I told Lee to wear his flak jacket tonight. And so first of all, I want to point it out that, before we move any further, that yes, this is a a controversial topic. There, you could probably find, if you find 10 prophecy teachers, you'll probably find 10 different opinions on this subject. And so we're not here saying we're the only perspective, but we're just going to share our perspective. And I want to make it also clear that this is not a salvation issue. This does not determine your salvation or where you will spend eternity based on how you view this topic. So, I'm sure in the chat tonight and in the comments later, there's going to be a plethora of opinions. And I just would ask you guys to remember what Christ said, that they will know you are mine by your love one for another. So let's be brothers in Christ and sisters in Christ and have love for one another, but still be iron sharpening iron and consider these things. So thank you guys for doing that with us. And so let's get into it, Lee. Babylon. So the title of this video is Babylon America? And what I would like to address first is something that I've heard quite a bit. In fact, I want to start it this way. Chuck Missler, as you know, Lee,
yes,
is one of my, probably the biggest hero of the faith for me. That's contemporary, that I got to meet Chuck Missler and I got to speak to him face to face. And when I finally get to meet Chuck Missler, this guy that I look up to so much and I appreciate, I asked him one question and face to face, and I asked him, who is Babylon in Revelation? And he said that in his perspective, it was literally actual Babylon, like Babylon in Iraq, Babylon. And I disagreed. And here's the thing. Did I throw away all of Chuck's books and quit listening to Chuck and quit loving Chuck? No. I hugged him and I got him to sign my book, and I still absolutely love Chuck Missler's teaching. But we can disagree on something.
Amen. When my wife and I travel, or when I travel alone, my go-to audiobooks are Chuck Missler's messages and books.
Awesome. Me too. My wife and I absolutely love it. So, but let's deal with this topic of, because Chuck had this view, and I even remember him writing a few articles and things about Babylon actually getting rebuilt. And I know there's a lot of others out there who believe that there's going to be some kind of a rebuilt Babylon that is going to exist in the tribulation period and in the last days. So what's your perspective on that? Because I think you and I share the same perspective on this.
Well, I think it's really kind of, well, I hate to use the word ridiculous, but I can't think of another word to use.
I agree.
So nicer. That to think that during the tribulation time, the city of Babylon is going to be rebuilt while all the judgments from heaven are falling. And while there's wars all around the planet and famine around the planet. And not only is this city going to be rebuilt, it's going to be a glorious city. It's not like a modern high-tech prefab city. It's a glorious city. And not then on top of that, it makes the whole world wealthy. So you have within a period of 7 years, maybe within a period of 3.5 years, they go from 0 to 60 and make the whole world wealthy. And on top of this, if you're going to rebuild Babylon, and it's going to be the Babylon of Revelation chapter 18, you have to dredge out the river and make a massive port and get a massive shipyard going. All that happening in the tribulation, in my mind, is far-fetched.
I agree. I completely agree. And here's the thing. This is why I think it's important that we talk about it tonight. Not that it's a salvation issue, because it's not, but I do think it can inform our perspective now.
Amen.
Especially concerning the things that we see lining up on the very near horizon.
That's right.
And so I agree with you. The thought that they're going to just completely, during the tribulation, or even, let's say if they have a little time before and going into the tribulation, to rebuild Babylon, dredge the river, make it a port city, and all of this stuff, it literally, I think, doesn't make sense. And I think if you stubbornly hold to that, you would have to say we're probably a century or two away from something like that even being possible for a rebuilt Babylon to begin to fit the description of Revelation 18.
That's right.
I mean, the time alone that it will take to do this is phenomenal. And as you mentioned, I completely agree. The thought that this can be built and the infrastructure can be put in place during the tribulation, as you have these seals and these judgments from God coming upon the earth, I do not think that is possible. And I think this is one of the reasons why we see right now, before the tribulation, all of the foundation being laid for the beast system.
That's right.
Because we have this global currency, we have this global government, Great Reset, all of this stuff. The wires are being run now because the infrastructure needs to exist and be in place the moment the Antichrist walks on the scene and he just flips the switch on, like Brother JD says.
That's right. Yep.
So it just makes sense to me that we're not talking about Babylon being a brand new infrastructure put in place during the tribulation. It's something that it's a pre-existing or an existing infrastructure that makes up Babylon of Revelation.
When you look at world history, it takes minimum of 1 century and oftentimes 2 centuries for a nation to rise to superpower status. There's just no way that you can take a nation like Iraq or Iran and in a period of 10 years raise them to superpower status. It's just not going to happen.
No. And guys, we're going to deal with NEOM in a second too, because I've had an earful on that as well, and I'm very well aware of it. But we're going to talk about that in a moment later. I wanted to read a little section of Revelation 18, verses 1 through 4, and I want to ask you something. So Revelation 18, 1 through 4 says, "And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not her plagues." So here's my question for you, Lee. If we're talking about a rebuilt Babylon during the time of the tribulation, what on earth are God's people doing in there?
Yeah.
Why would that be?
Well, certainly if you follow the historicist position where the Babylon is the Roman Catholic Church, you put yourself in an impossible situation. And the Lord might be able to say, okay, you 2 or 3 that are in there come out. But he's talking about his people here in a pretty broad way. And even during the tribulation, if you're looking at Babylon as the pagan capital city of the world, I can imagine that a good number of the believers like Abraham are going to be fleeing that city.
Right. So what I'm getting at, I guess, with that question is, let's say, okay, during the first 3.5 years, and again, I don't think this is possible, but let's say this Babylon is getting really rebuilt quickly and things are coming online. Well, it's clearly at the midpoint of the tribulation when just the full-on tyranny of Babylon comes in, and you've got to get the mark and you've got to submit. So during all of this time, we have wholesale, before the midpoint, we have wholesale martyring of Christians over the entire earth. So you're telling me that at the halfway point or somewhere here in the middle of the tribulation, after all this wholesale martyring of Christians, there's going to be a bunch of Christians in this Babylon, and God's telling them to now come out? It makes no sense to me.
Yes, there's going to be difficulties in this whole thing. And myself, I've wrestled with this. I know that some believers look at it as a rapture passage, and it makes more sense to me now than it ever has before as a rapture passage.
That's my perspective.
Yes, yes. But I also see that during the tribulation, there's going to be believers that are going to be scattered all around the world. They're still going to come from every tongue, every tribe, every nation, and every city. And the Lord's warning is going to be at that time to come out of the Babylonian system as well as the Babylonian location. Because if you don't, if you're on earth during an earthly dispensation, you can face earthly judgment with the ungodly if you're in a place of disobedience.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess this is a good point or a good time to kind of put my perspective forward there on Revelation 18, verse 4 being the rapture. Because my first point, I guess I was just trying to make is it makes no sense if you're thinking it's a rebuilt Babylon during the tribulation.
Right.
After all this martyrdom, now all of a sudden there's a bunch of Christians in this Babylon and now they need to come out. It just doesn't work with that scenario. So that's the kind of point I was trying to drive towards. But I do think it makes a lot of sense. And I've been thinking this way for a couple of years now, that Revelation 18:4 is the rapture. Because, you know, you read, it says, in verse 4, it says, and I heard another voice from heaven. So it's a voice from heaven, and it's God, because the voice says, come out of her, my people. We're not the people of some angel.
Yes.
We're the people of God.
And see, there is one thing that I think supports your position, and it'd be hard to argue against it, is once you understand that Babylon in the last days, there's going to be a place where it's the testimony of Babylon is focused, but yet the whole world is going to be part of the Babylon empire. And so there really is going to be no place to flee to avoid this judgment. If you're only talking about Rome in the middle of the week, and you can flee Rome, and if you're talking only about this Babylon city on the very last day, well, you can flee. But the fact of the matter is, on that day, fire is going to fall on earth and destroy the entire planet. There won't be one city left. Every city on the globe is going to be shaken to the ground. Every island and mountain is going to disappear. There really is no place to flee by human effort or strength.
Exactly.
The stuff starts coming down.
So it wouldn't make sense at all for God to say, the voice of God, to say to his people, come out, but you're really not going to have a chance because it's today that I'm completely annihilating this place.
Yeah.
There's only one way to do that, and it's the rapture. That's the only way you can accomplish Revelation 18:4, in my view. And I want to support it with this. If you go further down in the chapter 18, verse 23, it says, and the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. And as you said, this is in one day, very clearly here in Revelation that it happens. And the voice of the bridegroom, that's very key, the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. Well, this immediately makes me think of Luke 17:26-30, where it says, as in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. And then it goes into the days of Lot as well. So we see here, for sure, on this day in Revelation 18 in Babylon, the voice of the bridegroom and bride cease. And you have God calling his people out. And I know some people, when looking at Luke here, would say maybe this is not speaking about the rapture, but I believe it really is, because verse 30 says, even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed.
That's right.
And I believe Jesus is revealed to us at the rapture, because in 1 Peter 4:13 it says, but rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. And also John 17:24, Father, I will that they also whom thou hast given me be with me where I am. So we know we're going to go up to be with him where he is, that they may behold my glory, which thou hast given me. So to me, when you connect this to Revelation 18 about the voice of the bridegroom disappearing, it seems to be another connection to rapture. What do you think about that?
Well, to me, when I look at that, I haven't really decided that question myself entirely. I do think there's some good merit in the rapture in Luke 17. I think both you and Mondo Gonzalez make some great points there. I think you make some great points here on Revelation 18. One thing I do notice in this chapter that does go down that path, at least in my mind, it appears to, is where you were just now looking at verse 23. You follow on with verse 24. In her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. This is a very broad statement. This isn't just saying that they were guilty for the death of all the Christians that ever lived. They were guilty for the death of every saint that ever lived. They were guilty for the death of the prophets. Now we're looking at a spirit that not only can we trace it back to Nimrod, we can actually trace it back to the garden. We can trace it back to the serpent. And he's always had his plan to have his man down here on earth, defiling the testimony of God, roiling the earth with his defilements and his pollutions. So once we come up with here, now we're talking again about a Babylon that, yes, it does have a capital city, but the whole world is going to be the Babylonian system. And again, this puts us in a place where there really is going to be no place to flee. During the 70th week, those saints that do survive and come through out the other side, they don't survive because they've got a great bug out kit and they're pretty savvy on survivalism. The ones that are going to survive because they're preserved by the hand of God, whether they're preserved in the crevasse when the mountain splits on the very day of the Lord, whether they're hidden in the mountains of Edom and in the wilderness, or whether they're preserved by God like the 144,000. If you're not preserved by the Lord during the 70th week, you are not going to come out alive out the other side.
Right. And I want to make a quick note or an addendum to that, in that the Bible makes it very clear that, those who are to be killed will be killed and those who are to be martyred will be martyred. So,
that's right.
Because some people want to make a lot of these pre-tribulation passages and bend them into post-tribulation and say that, well, God's just going to protect us through the tribulation as opposed to take us out of it. But you and I agree, Revelation 3:10 and others make it crystal clear that is not the case. The church will not be preserved through the tribulation, but be kept out from the time altogether.
Yes. Now, one thing that I don't know if you've made this point other places in your teaching on the subject or not, but when you look at Revelation 18:4 and it says, "Come out of her, my people," this is very similar language to come up here in chapter 4, verse 1.
I completely have made that connection. I think it is the same moment. Revelation 4:1 and 18:4 to me are the same moment. And what I find very interesting as well is what do you see directly after Revelation 18, but the bride of Christ in heaven in Revelation 19.
That's exactly right. Yep.
And to me, that's no coincidence, because it really makes sense. And so I think what you just mentioned, though, about all the saints, the blood of all the saints being kept in her or being, attributed to her, was key, because we're dealing with a spirit here. And so I think that's the perfect segue to get into our next point for tonight, and that is what I would call system versus seat, or you could say it another way, spirit versus vessel.
That's right.
And so we'll go to the statue from Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which Daniel interpreted for Nebuchadnezzar, and what we'll see clearly is that the statue represents Babylon.
That's right.
The spirit, the system.
That's right.
But throughout time, it morphs and it moves geographically. So you have the seat or the vessel changing geographic places, but the spirit remaining the same.
That's exactly right.
So if I could, I always love to, just actually bring up the scripture, and then we can talk about it. So let's read Daniel 2:31 through 45. And it says, "Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. The great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and arms of silver, his belly and thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron, part of clay. Thou sawest till a stone was cut out with hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and become like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell you the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art King of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowl of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art the head of gold. And after thee shall arise another kingdom, inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these things, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes of part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it the strength of the iron. For as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, and as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom," can't wait for that, "which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall be left to no other people, not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof is sure." What an incredible prophecy. We are literally looking at a prophecy from that point in time to the very end. You just looked at and you just heard about the rest of human history from that point forward in one prophecy.
Yes.
How mind-blowing is that? So let's pull this up and let's talk about it. Lee, let me pull up a picture and let's talk about this, because I've got a great illustration that we can share. Okay, here we go. There it is. So as you and I were saying, we're dealing with a spirit that moves geographically throughout time. So could you talk about that a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Here, of course, in this image, we have the head of gold, which is the Babylonian Empire, and the breast and arms of silver, the Medo-Persian Empire. It moved from there to the Greek Empire with the belly and thighs of brass. Then it dropped to the, first of all, the united buttocks, and then to the legs of iron, which is the Roman Empire, which divided in the 5th century permanently. It actually started to fracture in the 4th century. But when you look at this image, one of the things you notice is these things are connected.
Yep.
And they stay connected. When the power passed to the Medo-Persian Empire, Babylon did not cease to exist. It just ceased to be the driving force, or the empire that is the empire that's going to dominate the world. And so this whole aspect of domination actually traces way back prior to this image. It traces back to Nimrod. And that's where, all post-flood history of the rebellion and the mystery of iniquity traces back essentially to Nimrod, because whatever there was of iniquity in the world at that time, he gathered it all up. He maximized it, he magnified it, he glorified it, he elevated it, he basically expanded it, and he took it darker and deep and worse than it's ever been before. And this spirit has continued to this day. And we, well, right now we're in the time of the fractured toes, and the little horn is no doubt starting to rear its head. And we're still dealing with the same spirit. We are dealing with the same spirit that was in the head of gold. We are dealing with the same spirit that was in Nimrod and his empire.
I completely agree, because I think crystal clearly, I mean, I really don't think that there's an argument around this. Crystal clearly, this statue is one thing. It's Babylon. It's one thing from head to toe. So, for instance, you know, I am Tyler from my head to my toes.
Yes.
I'm not a different person at my toes than I am at my head.
And that's why Babylon's the golden head.
Exactly. And so, what's the only thing different from my head to my toes is the physical location.
That's exactly right.
And that's exactly what we see here. Babylon, the spirit, did not cease to exist. It geographically moved.
That's
and it
exactly
moved from Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom at that point in that moment in time when he had that dream, then to the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greco-Macedonian kingdom, then the legs of iron being Rome. And how perfectly, you know, they literally just crushed their opposition. I mean, Rome is famous for that, just crushing the opposition. And also, you know, I know you can talk about this even better than I can, how Rome split. It's at the point of Rome, exactly as it should be, that Rome split into two empires, the two legs.
That's exactly right.
Could you give us a little history there on that?
Well, I don't have the exact dates off the top of my head. I have them written down in my other notes, and I didn't get them into my Babylonian notes. But the Roman Empire struggled for over a century, and gradually moved into, basically, for all practical purposes, having two capitals, one in Rome, one in Constantinople, the western half and the eastern half. And it was early in the 5th century when this fragmentation became complete. And it was then when Rome was sacked by the Goths and the Visigoths, and the Roman Empire in the western half was basically crushed and defeated. It rose up in a feeble way after that, but it was never the same. And really the power of the Roman Empire then moved east, and they were the seat of the Roman Empire until, I believe it was around 1476, Constantinople fell to the Turks.
Right. And so what's so interesting is, you know, it's exactly as Scripture predicted. It happened. It's one kingdom, the legs of iron, but they split into two, perfectly fulfilling Scripture. And what's so cool is we see that these are all time markers. The head is a time marker. The chest is a time marker. The waist is a time marker. The legs are a time marker. And the feet are a time marker. And we are now
in the toe.
What?
We're in the toes.
We're in the toes. And so these feet are where we're at. And so what we're going to see, because these are kingdoms, this final kingdom is going to have some of the strength or the essence of a Roman Empire, but it is not going to look like Rome.
Yep. I just want to take a quick rabbit trail here, bro.
Go ahead.
When you're talking about, we can tell where we're at in the flow of history, where we're at in the flow of God's program. We're not only in the time of the split toes, we're in the time when those toes are making a concerted effort to reunify.
Yes.
That tells us we are at the end of the age, and that fact in and of itself points to the near tribulation and the near rapture of the church.
Absolutely, 100%. I want to bring up a even more fun picture, because this is the really good part right here.
Woo!
There you go. So
that believer doesn't long for that day.
Oh man. So here's the cool part, guys. It is at the time of the feet kingdom that this rock comes. And where does it come? What time? Because where the rock hits tells you what time the rock shows up.
That's exactly right.
Because these are time markers.
It hits the feet.
It hits the feet, guys. We are in the feet time. And, you know, this is Jesus, by the way. This rock is Jesus, who it says, and in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. And it shall, and if you go earlier when it talks about it in his dream, it says that the rock filled the entire earth.
That is a blessing.
Yeah,
That's what we're looking forward to, guys. That is literally the moment that we come
Okay, I haven't been enjoying this one, guys, to be honest.
back with Jesus, pictured in Revelation 19, and it is going to be incredible. Jesus is the rock. Psalm 94:22 says, "But the Lord is my defense, and my God is the rock of my refuge."
Towards that day.
Oh, I'll give it a bit more go. Yeah.
When the head with his body descends from heaven to destroy this head and its body.
Love that. Love that. Absolutely, guys. So this is what we're looking forward to.
The brain in that head is the enemy himself, Satan.
Yep. He's going to, the guys, what we are struggling with in our day is the same spirit that that mankind has always been oppressed by. It is this mystery school religion battle.
Just a couple of things I didn't agree with him on. I don't remember what they were now, so they weren't too important.
Babylonian satanic system that we have been under, and we will be freed from this when Christ comes.
Amen.
How awesome will that be? So let's talk about America now, brother, because I know you and I agree that America is Babylon. America is the Babylon spoken of in Revelation 18. And like I said, this is a controversial topic, but Lee and I would like to lay out our perspective and lay out some verses and some support to our perspective. So I want to start by saying this. Some would say that the very thought of America, if you even say America is Babylon, that this is simply just American-centric thinking. You know, oh, you typical American, you just think everything's about you, you know?
Yep. Well, you know what's funny about that is why would anyone be upset about that? Because if you understand what we're saying this great America is not that great and it's going to get crushed.
Exactly. And this is where it comes to informing your perspective now on being beneficial, this topic being beneficial, because there are many in the church out there, I would say, who are more focused at making Babylon great again than they are in being excited at being alive in the time of the toes when Jesus is about to come. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. We do not want our heart to be taken up by political pride and political platforms trying to make Babylon great again. And I don't care if you think America is Babylon or not. It doesn't matter what country you live in. Your patriotism cannot be allowed to trump your followership of Jesus Christ.
I agree. Amen. So as we've shown already, guys, crystal clearly in Scripture, Babylon does not simply mean Babylon in Iraq or wherever you think Babylon. Some people say it's in Turkey or whatever. It doesn't mean, Babylon doesn't simply mean the literal, original, geographical Babylon. It does not, according to Scripture. I mean, there's just not a way around it there when you consider Daniel. It moves, it's the spirit, the same, but it moves location throughout time.
And especially when you come to Revelation 18 and 17, and you have mystery Babylon.
Yep. And it goes into the description of that. And so that's what we're about to get into. Here's what I want to say. I want to start with reading Revelation 17:18. And the woman which thou sawest, the woman which thou sawest, is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. And then in Revelation 18, so that's the last verse in Revelation 17.
Yeah.
In Revelation 18, it then goes on to describe in detail the destruction of that woman, the great city. And so here's my statement that I want to start off our America's talk with. If the great city of Babylon, who is the woman riding the beast, if she had a glass slipper, it would fit on the foot of America like a glove.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The proof is in the pudding.
And so
I've thought about, a lot of times people say, well, I don't see America in prophecy. I mean, I don't see America mentioned. Well, yeah, America is not specifically mentioned. But this is an argument from silence, and arguments from silence can be very deceiving. I want to point out that in no prophetic passage do we read the name Rome, or do we read the Roman Empire, or do we read even Italy. In fact, many of the nations that are part of the fractured Roman Empire, they are not mentioned in any prophetic passage in the last days. Are you going to assume because they're not mentioned that they're not part of the last days? You can't go down that path. So the fact that America is not directly mentioned doesn't mean anything more significant than the fact that Rome or Italy are not mentioned in prophetic passages. When you go on from there, I think America actually is mentioned indirectly, or maybe I should say kind of in a shadow. For instance, in Ezekiel 38:13, we read, Sheba indeed, and the merchants of Tarshish, with all the young lions thereof, shall say, art you come to take a spoil? This is the opposition to the Russian juggernaut and all of our allies invading Israel. And I think this is America and England and this group of nations standing on the sideline and just not doing anything significant. And the fact of the matter is, Tarshish is not Tartessus, which was in Spain just outside the gates of Hercules, which we now know as the Strait of Gibraltar. The Tarshish was the island of England. It was also known as the Tin Isles. And there's many ancient places in England that have their ancient names match, line up with Tarshish or Tharshish or Thracis. So, and on top of that, the ancient Assyrian records indicate that Tarshish was an island.
I completely agree with you. And I want to ask you a quick question because I think it has a big implication. I agree with J.D. Farag, and I want to know if you do, that it's likely or it's possible that Isaiah 17 could be describing the catalyst to Ezekiel 38. What do you think about that?
It's possible. I haven't really plumbed that chapter yet to the bottom. It's part of the whole picture of trying to line up Ezekiel 38, 39, Psalm 83. You have this chapter, chapter 17, and there's a few other chapters that are under consideration.
Right.
That is actually a very big subject.
It is. And here's why I bring it up. I think, in my perspective, it is connected. And so even putting Isaiah 17 aside, though, I think most of us agree that Ezekiel 38 is somewhere just before or in the beginning of the tribulation period. Would you agree?
Yes, I would place it before the tribulation myself so that it sets up the circumstances for the Antichrist to be unchallenged in the tribulation.
Okay, I agree with you. That's my perspective as well. And so what's interesting to me then, if you believe that, and I do, is that in Ezekiel 38, so we're talking about before tribulation or right around near the beginning of tribulation, America is already not strong enough to put its foot down and stop it. And especially as things progress from Ezekiel 38, it just, if Revelation 18:4 is the rapture, it just gives even more credence that somewhere there early on, the rapture happens. Because we absolutely believe in a pre-tribulation rapture here.
Yep.
And America is lessened, if not destroyed. And I believe it will be actually destroyed, torn down and destroyed at the beginning or near the beginning in that range of that final 7 years.
Yeah, and here's an interesting point that goes along with that. When you have the removal of the believers in Revelation 18:4, the reason for that is it's time to judge Babylon.
Yes.
And the judgment of Babylon, though it doesn't finish until the last day, it begins on day 1 of the tribulation.
Yep. And it starts, as we see in Revelation 18, with the city.
Yeah.
The city. The spirit is the final thing that ends up being wiped out.
Yeah.
But the city it being America, the geographical seat, because I would argue, and I think you agree, that this 10-toed kingdom is our time that we're living in, but the current geographical seat of Babylon, the spirit of Babylon, is America.
There's no doubt in my mind, and I've often thought about that I think a lot of people are going to be caught by surprise in the future when all their prognostications about America ceasing to be a superpower are. They've been saying that for 4 decades, and for 4 decades it has not come to pass. They've been looking at Europe becoming the new superpower. Well, Europe has some power, but it's not a superpower. I think people are going to be surprised. We come right up to the rapture, and America is still a superpower.
So let's read, since we're talking about Revelation 18 so much, let's read through a portion of it here, because this is the description that really gives you a lot of clues. This is what I would call the glass slipper. So let's read the glass slipper and let's think about what foot it fits. So Revelation 18, 7 through 20. How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously. So much torment and sorrow give her, for she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judgeth her, and the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, the Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and fine wood and all manner of vessels of ivory and all manner of vessels of most precious wood and brass and iron and marble and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beasts and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and souls of men. And the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all these which are dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. The merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. And every shipmaster, and all company in ships, and sailors, and as many as trade by sea, stood afar off, and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? And they cast dust on their heads, and cried weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, this great city, wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea, by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. So, who does that sound like to you?
In my mind, I don't see how you could escape that. This can't be. It's New York City, and New York City is a representation of America. Maybe you're going to have Washington, D.C. mingled in that, but those two cities basically characterize the entirety of America.
Yeah, and I think we are talking about, I think this judgment will come on the entirety of America.
Yes, no doubt.
I don't think, and I know you weren't saying this, but I don't think it's going to just be New York City blown up. You know, we're talking about the nation.
No. People are not going to weep when Minneapolis or Tucson, Arizona go. But when Chicago and New York City and Washington, D.C. go, and Silicon Valley, a lot of people will be weeping.
Yeah. And so to just add some more context here, you know, it talks about just being the center of commerce and you know, living deliciously and glorifying herself. And I just think, you know,
no nation on earth more characterizes that than America. We enjoy greater wealth for the average person than any nation ever in the history of the world.
Right. So here's an image for you guys to look at while we're talking about this. I mean, not only is America the petrodollar, we have a financial status in the world that no one else enjoys. I think we can borrow money at like 2% or something like that. The dollar is king, and we have this all of entertainment and this luscious living and this extravagant rich living is literally pumped out to the entire world.
That's right.
From one undisputed king, America. And we see on our currency and in these celebrities with all their symbols,
the all-seeing eye.
Yeah, this mystery religion Babylonian system is the lifeblood of this nation.
You know what's really interesting? I saw today on Twitter, Elon Musk was having a little interaction, and I forget the exact quote, but he was with another philosopher. And the concept of this philosophy was that we have to have a long-term perspective, a long-term vision. And anyone that has a short-term vision, that's unrighteousness. And it's evil. And so this whole, in their concept, if you look at America and you see judgment coming, you look at the world and you see judgment coming, and you don't see long-term progress and long-term growth, that's evil. And any person or any being that would interfere with this long-term growth and long-term vision is evil.
Yeah, it's so funny how Satan twists words, you know, because they love to get on their mainstream media news outlets and talk about, you know, these people that are dangerous and these people that are spreading misinformation, and they love to characterize good by turning it into evil. You know, woe to those who call good evil and evil good. And that's exactly where we're at, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's come to the point now where if someone throws a label of misinformation out, people are intimidated. They don't want to believe anything that's called misinformation. Well, if you're intimidated by that term, you are going to walk away from the truth.
Yep. And let me tell you something, guys, everyone here in America, it's these people who call evil good and good evil. They're the ones that have been lying to you right here, these guys. And all this stuff, all these symbols, this symbol that these celebrities are doing, that not only is the all-seeing eye, it is 3 6s. It's 666. This is the satanic Babylonian system that has been lying to you and manipulating every single form of media and information at every level to the smallest degree, and finance every part of our society. And so, you know, again, we see the glass slipper fitting America's foot perfectly. I wanted to bring up one more picture because I think this is pretty interesting, especially, you know, even regarding our time that we're living in. It talks about how all who have ships at sea are going to be standing afar off and mourning her destruction. Well, people haven't realized it because it's kind of gotten quiet in the news lately. They were talking about it more last year, but this is from Friday, July 29th. And it says, here we go again. This is Zero Hedge article, Zero Hedge. It says, here we go again, record container ship traffic jam as blocking continues to build. And it says, but in fact, North American port congestion has just re-entered record territory. The offshore traffic jam is once again as bad as it's ever been. And it says in January and February, when North American congestion was previously peaked, there were just under 150 container vessels. As of Thursday morning, there were 153. Wow. So this, you see here, all the merchants of sea. I mean, we are the center point of world commerce. We import.
That's right.
So I think that's a key point there in Revelation 18. It's not an exporter, it's an importer.
Yep.
So we have ships from all over the world coming here, and we're buying their goods. They're getting rich from us buying their goods.
That's exactly right.
And so what's amazing to me is, you know, we're seeing not only this New World Order system literally on the horizon. We got your digital currency and your identity and all of these things that they're wanting to wrap up into the beast system and the mark of the beast and all of that. It's literally plumbed and ready to go. We also see the situation of America as extremely tenuous and doesn't look good. You have all this tension going on with the East right now, and Nancy flying over there on her broomstick. And, you know, we literally have a record number of ships at sea waiting to get in here, just staring at America, which is, I think, a little bit uncanny.
It really is an interesting question whether America is going to get judged early in the tribulation, or whether she actually is the capital of the world all the way to the end and gets judged near the end. I mean, one thing, when you look at the relationship between Revelation 18 and Revelation 19, Armageddon happens, in my estimation, after the judgment of Babylon.
I agree. I think that's a really interesting question, and I could see how people could go either way with it. I think if I just go to using logic and reason and try and line it up with scripture, what I see going on, or what I see the goal of the New World Order, is that America has got to be broken and torn down, because it really represents the current world order.
Yep.
And they want this phoenix to rise from the ashes of the New World Order.
Yep.
And so I see it lining up with more towards the beginning, or at the beginning being destroyed, and then that kind of lines up with what it talks about in Revelation, about how in Revelation 17 these 10 kings, they hate the woman. Yep. and they destroy her.
Yeah. Now, I've got a little bit different tack with that.
Okay.
In that I've taken the woman as religious Babylon, represented by Rome.
Okay.
And then we have secular and political, military, economic Babylon, which is, in my estimation, would be the little horn, which would be, in my mind, America, with the 10 kings. And in this picture, we have America basically dominating the world until the end of the tribulation, and then getting destroyed by God. Now, what's interesting, though, about this is, well, first, let me give some arguments that I see why America is Babylon. One thing that's interesting is people have wanted a new world order for many, many centuries, and this is why the secret societies arose, to bring out a new world order. But early on, they figured out that you couldn't just have one country from Europe reign over the other countries, because the other countries would absolutely not have it. Every country wanted to be the head. So their vision was to start a new world order that would come through a new country. And so every country in Europe has immigrants here in America, and America rose from that to be the dominant superpower in the world. And we've basically been the leader of the whole new world order vision since well, basically since World War One. What's also interesting, America is colonies from Spain, France, and in England. Those were the last three superpowers of the western half of the fractured Roman Empire. What's also interesting is America's defeated all three of those in war. Here's some other interesting thoughts. The symbol of the Roman Empire was the eagle. The symbol of America is the eagle. English has become the lingua franca of the entire world, and the English, or the American dollar, has become basically the capital of the entire world. And on top of that, America, at least up until a couple of years ago, was really the only military superpower in the world. And America could go up against the next five biggest nations on earth. We could go up against Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, throw in any other 2 or 3 nations you want, all at one time. And if America took the gloves off and didn't play a police war and went dead serious warfare, our naval superiority and our air superiority and our technology superiority would run the table. So we come up with some interesting questions like this. So in my mind, really what we're looking at is there's actually at least 6 or 7 visions for the New World Order that are jockeying for power right now. There's a vision for the New World Order that's basically headed up by some of the right-wing conservatives in America and people in the other parts of the world that want America to be the head of the New World Order. There's a lot of people that want Europe to be the head of the New World Order. There are people that want the UN to be the head of the New World Order. There are people that want China to run the New World Order. There are people that want Russia to run the New World Order. And all these visions are jockeying with each other. Only one of them is going to come out on top of the New World Order and be the New World Order king of the hill. And so really, in my mind, we really only have 2 options that can be considered if we're going to be thinking scripturally. And one would be Europe running the world and dominating the UN. The other would be America running the world and dominating Europe and the UN. And so this kind of comes up to your question, because really we're coming up to a crux here where either America has to be removed from the picture for the UN and Europe to run the world, or the US has to step up and say and dominate the whole thing. And so really the proof is going to be in the pudding.
I agree with you. And I completely agree. I think that is the crux. That's the crossroads. I see it going, like I said, America being destroyed first and it going to Europe. And one of the reasons also is, taking like scriptures like Ezekiel 38 and seeing how America is a minor note.
Yeah, and I would go a little bit different direction there. Here's my thought. Are we weak militarily in that point? Or are we just lost our willpower?
Yeah, it could be either. You could argue either.
Yeah.
So I think there's, like I said, and that's why I love that we're having this conversation, because I love for people to see that even you and I, who agree on like 95% of what we're talking about here, and a lot of good brothers in Christ disagree with our perspective.
Yep, that's right.
People we love in Christ. There's a lot of different perspectives on this, and we can talk about this in a friendly manner and consider things without being angry or
No, because really what we want people to do, we want people to start weighing ideas they haven't been considering.
Yep.
Because it's harder to find the exact truth than it is to start rejecting ideas that don't fit. For me, it's real easy to reject the idea that Babylon is not literal, historical Babylon, risen to glory in the last days.
Yep.
That one's easy to set aside. Well, once we set that one aside, now we're really stuck with the spiritual Babylon that you were describing earlier, that comes from the head down to the toes. And the spirit's been here since Nimrod, all the way back to the garden with the serpent. And this has obviously got its tentacles deep in America. It's got its tentacles deep in Europe. Which of these visions is going to come out on top? Right. And as long as people are thinking down this path, we're thinking biblically.
I agree. I totally agree. I completely agree there. You know, one of the things for me, like I said, Revelation 18:4 being the rapture.
Yeah.
I feel pretty convinced on that point, and I think that is another, in my perspective, another reason that gives that perspective credence that it's near the beginning.
Yeah.
Because of course we believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, but again, you could also look at that and say, well, this is talking about a broad scope and time where yes, the rapture happens first, and then later, you know, America is destroyed at the end of the tribulation. You could make that case because, I mean, there's the famous 2,000-year comma where Jesus stopped at a comma and it ended up being 2,000 years. So you can't just say that because the scripture is one sentence away from the next, that it's the same day, and not necessarily in every case. So I see the perspective how, in my opinion, if it is the pre-tribulation rapture, then it's a strong possibility that it's talking about this destruction happens at the beginning of the tribulation. But you could make the case that not necessarily. So I like that. And one thing I also wanted to point out regarding that, you know, another connection to America, and it's right there also in Revelation 18:4 that I kind of skipped over, is it says, I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, but that ye be not partakers in her sin, and that ye receive not her plagues. Oh no, sorry, that's not the one I wanted to mention. I gotta go to a different scripture. Revelation, let's see. Where is it? It's the one that says you just it deceived the nations with its sorceries. Which one is that? I'm trying to find weeping. It's right there in Revelation 18 somewhere.
In 23.
Thank you. Can you read that? Okay, so but the Lord, I got it. No, I lost it again. Can you read that scripture for me? I had it, but I must have deleted it.
The light of the candle shall shine no more at all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall be no more heard at all in thee, for thy merchants were the great men of the earth, and by thy sorceries were all nations deceived.
So I think that one's an interesting point. I've heard this brought up, and I wanted to mention it. This word sorceries, where, you know, it says that all nations were deceived by sorcery.
Yep.
I think that's interesting because there's a couple levels to that word. You know, that's a Greek word, pharmakia, and you're the guy who understands Greek, you know, way better than anyone else I know. But it's for people listening, the Strong's number is G5331 for that word pharmakia. And when I look at Strong's, it says, you know, medication, pharmacy. That is by extension magic, literal or figurative, sorcery, witchcraft.
That's right.
So there's some interesting things there because, of course, we know that our Babylonian system, you know, elites that are ruling and pulling the strings behind the curtains, they're clearly involved in witchcraft and satanic ritual. And
there is no doubt about it.
No doubt about it. But then there's also this level of medication and pharmacy. And is that what we're seeing over these last couple of years of the whole world? I mean, it's never happened in the history of the world that the entire world has been in lockstep on the same issue and all marching at the same drum, to the same beat. And you can't deny the drum beat is medical.
That's exactly right.
That seems to be pretty interesting to me. What's your take on that?
Well, I think there's no doubt that you can go back as much as 40 or 50 years and you can see a correlation between the increase of certain medical practices and the increase of death rates. That doesn't mean that you can prove that there's a correlation there, because things with statistics can get pretty murky in a hurry. But I think it is an interesting consideration that there are people in the medical world themselves that are very skeptical of certain parts of the medical world because they see that more damage is done than good. And when I went in for my own heart treatment, there were people in the medical profession that encouraged me, don't take your heart medicine because it will destroy your muscles. If you don't need to take it, don't take it. Don't go begging for that stuff.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah. So I tend to really agree with someone like JD Farag and his perspective regarding what's going on right now, because it really is the thing that the entire world is marching to, and it's unprecedented. It is a medical pharmacy related thing that has gotten control over all the nations. And
That's
we've
exactly
just
right.
we've just
And
never seen that before.
There's potential for trillions of dollars to be made. There's the potential in the name of health, actually depopulating the globe. There's just a lot of iniquity that's going on in this. So the handful of people get rich, and it's the very handful of people that are trying to depopulate the globe and bring the world population to 500 million.
And to me, again, that just sounds so much like this Revelation 18 Babylon that we read about. She gets rich, and part of that getting rich is just
her
death and destruction, and through pharmakia.
Yep, that's right.
I mean, that really just, again, the glass slipper seems to be fitting perfectly.
Yep. There's no
Is there any other points you have on Babylon and America and the connection that you see there?
Well, let's see here. I do have a few other thoughts here. I do find it interesting, for instance, that the man who claimed to be Nebuchadnezzar's reincarnation and had a vision to rebuild literal Babylon, surprise, surprise, it was the United States that knocked that man out and destroyed his Babylon vision. I find that fascinating. The other thing I think it's interesting is that people have been saying ever since I was a young believer, way back in the 80s, America's going to collapse, the dollar's going to collapse, Europe's going to rise, Europe's going to control the whole thing. I can't say that's not going to yet happen in the future. But when you have a 4-decade track record of saying America's going to collapse and it doesn't collapse, the dollar's going to collapse, it doesn't collapse, the euro is going to rise to be the world superpower in the monetary realm. Europe's going to rise to be the world's military and economic superpower, and it's not come to pass. And now we've seen the #1 economy in the EU, which was England, depart, and now we're looking at the potential for Germany, the #2 economic power in the EU, is shown great exasperation in the last few years. I wouldn't be surprised if Germany ultimately leaves and joins with her Scythian cousins in the Gog and Magog coalition. If Germany leaves, the EU is going to fracture.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And to bring up, kind of, you touched on it, I wanted to bring up Neom, because this is a technological city, just a hyper tech city that's being planned in Saudi Arabia. And, you've got people going wild about how this is definitely Babylon. This is the end times Babylon. And here's my perspective on it. I wanted to see what you had to say about it. But regarding Neom, I think I would just say, the plans of mice and men,
Yeah, right.
And of course it looks Babylonian. It's that spirit that is behind something like that. Of course it looks very Babylonian. It looks very end times-esque. But again, the possibility that this thing is going to get built, especially if the tribulation is about to start, if it's supposed to be built during that period, I think it's just impossible.
Yeah, that's right.
And I would say this thing's never going to get built, guys. It's a pipe dream. Literal physical Babylon, again, is not. It doesn't stay put. It moves throughout time.
That's exactly right. And I would add to that, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at Neom in Saudi Arabia or whether you're going to look at literal Babylon in Iraq. One of the problems you're facing is neither of these places were ever an actual true part of the Roman Empire. They just weren't. And on top of that, neither of them are colonies derived from the Roman Empire. Now England was part of the Roman Empire. So with America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, we're colonies of England. So we are basically colonies of the fractured Roman Empire. America is also a colony of Spain and colonies of France. We're basically pieces of the fractured Roman Empire. We're an extension of the Roman Empire. You can make that claim for America. You cannot make that claim for Babylon or for Saudi Arabia.
That's a really good point, Lee. I think that's a really good point. And we're already over an hour here, but I think if you had time, you tell me. If you don't, that's fine. But I would maybe touch briefly on this topic of the daughter of Babylon that Doug Woodward brings up, because Doug Woodward is someone out there who has done a lot of research and talked a lot about America being what he sees as the daughter of Babylon. And I thought maybe we could touch on that, but you let me know if you have time or not.
No, we got a few minutes. Doug Woodward really deserves to be read by every believer who's interested in the whole concept that America might actually have something to do in Bible prophecy. He's one of the heavy hitters on the subject. He ought to be on everybody's show. There's no doubt about it. Nonetheless, when he looks at like Jeremiah 50, 51, Isaiah 13, Isaiah 47, Zechariah 12, and he sees the daughter of Babylon in these passages. There's association of America in there. I'm a little hesitant to take that strictly because I think that these passages were largely addressing actually historical Babylon. However, that does not mean that there's not spiritual analogies in those passages that pertain to the spirit of Babylon that don't also apply to the United States or to Europe or whoever is going to be the ultimate form of Babylon in the last days.
Yeah.
It would be wrong not to trace Babylon through there.
I agree. And I agree with you on Doug Woodward. He seems to be just a really nice guy, a humble brother in Christ. He's a scholar, and I definitely would encourage people to listen and consider his perspective as well. Yeah. I don't personally know him, but he seems to be a great guy. He's clearly done a lot of research on this topic, and I appreciate all his effort in it. But I would agree. I would even take I'm going to take a separate but maybe parallel perspective to you on the daughter of Babylon thing not being necessarily how Doug Woodward sees it, because it could be more representing, like Jeremiah 50 and 51 could be more representing historical Babylon, like you're thinking possibly. But I would say, even if, let's say, it is talking about America Babylon.
Yes.
This is something Doug Woodward says. He says that he sees 3 Babylons in the end time. He sees a daughter of Babylon, he sees mystery Babylon, and then Babylon the Great. And he says these are different entities. I would disagree with that.
I would.
And I'm going to give my perspective as to why. And one thing is, first of all, the type and the pattern. What we've seen throughout history, and we see in Nebuchadnezzar's statue dream, is that there's 2 parts. There's a system or a spirit, and then there's a geographical seat or vessel.
That's right.
So there's 2 parts. There's not 3. And I think that's exactly what we're going to see here at the end. I think we have 2 parts. For instance, when you're looking at like Revelation 17 and Revelation 18 and considering those, I do believe there's 2 parts. You're addressing the spirit and the city or the geographical location.
That's right.
And so one thing that Doug Woodward brings up is he brings up how in, for instance, Jeremiah 50 and 51, he says that there's this daughter of Babylon, and that alone exclusively is talking about America. And the Babylon the Great and the Mystery Babylon are definitely not. I disagree with that, because one point I want to mention is that in Jeremiah 50 and 51, the phrase daughter of Babylon is only mentioned once in chapter 50 and once in chapter 51. There's probably 40 other times, I didn't count them, but a lot, by far the majority of the times, it is simply just called Babylon. It's not called exclusively daughter of Babylon. And then I would reference other scriptures. So for instance, Isaiah 62:11, because here's the point I want to try and make. The daughter of in scripture is not necessarily a totally separate entity. It can be that thing itself.
That's right.
So I see, for instance, like Isaiah 62:11 through 12, behold, the Lord hath proclaimed unto the end of the world, say ye to the daughter of Zion, behold, thy salvation cometh, behold, his reward is with him, and his work before him, and they shall call him the holy people. Sorry, call them the holy people, the redeemed of the Lord, and thou shalt be called, sought out, a city not forsaken. So we're talking about Israel, and it's being called the daughter of Zion. And then again, we can go to Zechariah 9:9, and it says, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee, he is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt in the foal of an ass. So here we see the prophetic picture of Jesus riding in on the donkey to Jerusalem, and it says, daughter of Jerusalem, he's coming to you. Well, where did he come? Actually, it wasn't another Jerusalem or another thing like Jerusalem. It was the Jerusalem.
That's exactly right.
So that's where I would say
that's an example where we want to be careful that we don't get hyper technical and give something a technical distinction that the Bible itself never makes.
Yes, I agree. So that's where I would say, to Doug's point, when he says that the daughter of Babylon has to technically exclusively be a separate entity, I don't think that necessarily holds consistent in scripture. So that would be my counterpoint.
Yep.
Well, I think we just about covered everything, unless you have another point that you wanted to bring up.
I was just scrolling through my notes here real quick to see if there's anything that I should bring up that we didn't bring up. Well, I think we covered, we pretty much covered things pretty significantly.
That's great. Well, there's 1,575 people here with us right now, which is a blessing. Thank you guys for being here with us. And guys, I want again just to stress here. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I do have one more point.
Bring it up.
We got a couple minutes here.
Yeah.
The argument is often made that Babylon has to be destroyed, and it hasn't, and it's always existed. It's never been destroyed. And if that's the case, I mean, then that's one of the strongest arguments for literal Babylon. But the fact of the matter is, starting around 275 BC, Babylon was in serious decline. A lot of the inhabitants were transported into other times. And by the rise of the Parthian Empire in 141 BC, Babylon was deserted and forgotten. And when you come to in AD 115, according to Cassius Dio, Trajan went there to see Babylon, knowing of its fame because he read about it, and there were nothing but mounds and stones and ruins. And he went there because he honored Alexander. And this state continued for centuries. When the Muslim conquest of the area happened around 650 AD, the city was buried beneath sands. There was nothing there. And over the centuries, pilgrims would visit, and traveling people would pass through, but there was no permanent population in the area of Babylon until the archaeological digs in the 19th century, which would be the 1800s. And that's when the people started showing up to work for the archaeological digs and to have shops around the archaeological digs. And now there's been a minor population that comes and goes, like a transient population in the area. But you really had virtually 1,500 years where there was no Babylon. It was gone. And what's there now is not Babylon. And what was trying to be built by Saddam Hussein to rebuild Babylon that was obviously not in God's cards, and God shut it down.
Yep. And so while the literal, physical, original location of Babylon was just sitting there, barely a thing other than a geological dig, there was the spirit of Babylon still existing, but in a different geographical location.
Yep. And if you have...
Okay, guys, I'm going to bail now. It's only got a minute to go anyway. God bless. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.